The Trump administration deposes Venezuelan dictator Nicolas Maduro in a shocking and astonishing omission by the United States military. Plus, is the Iranian regime going to fall? And Governor of Minnesota Tim Walz announces he is not running for re-election in the wake of gigantic fraud allegations. First, we are only 5 days into the year. If this weekend was any indication, this is going to be a year where you want the news as it happens, not tabloids, not clickbait, actual news, actual facts, well-informed in real time, and analysis from the most trusted voices in conservative media. This is why the Daily Wire exists. You get serious investigative journalism uncovering domestic issues like fraud in Minneapolis, real reporting on major international developments like the U.S. operation in Venezuela. You also get live updates, breaking news alerts, and full access to our daily ad-free uncensored shows and premium entertainment library. Head on over to dailywire.com/subscribe. Today is the last day to save 40% on a new annual membership. Don't miss it. Well, folks, we are here, 2026, and it's going to be a huge year as this year develops. You're going to hear about all the exciting things that we have planned here for you at Daily Wire. It's more than we have ever done before by a very, very long shot. But I want to start this year by talking about some big predictions for 2026. 2026 is the year of clarity. All the veils are going to fall. People are going to show you who they are. Now, that can be scary. Sometimes it's difficult to deal with the realities of life, the realities of people you once trusted showing themselves to be something else. It can also be surprising and heartening because sometimes people show themselves to be a lot better than you thought they were. But this year, events in the United States and the world more broadly are going to unmask nearly everyone. Why? Well, because I think we are on the precipice of something pretty big. And when big things happen, when the world becomes more chaotic, people reveal themselves. Adversity reveals character. And we're about to experience some adversity as Americans. Where will that adversity come from? Well, it could come from the international sphere. Adversity may spring from China's authoritarian ambitions against Taiwan, or its global desire to expand power bases from Africa to Latin America. Already, we've seen some politicians and commentators shying away from revealing the realities about China, fearful that doing so could undercut their delusional vision of a world in which America in retreat is somehow good rather than harmful. Adversity could arise from the continued conflict between Russia and Ukraine, or from Russia's growing ambitions in the region and globally. Many figures are already revealing themselves in their views of Russia, often evidencing shocking blindness toward what Russia is, what Russia wants, up to and including full-scale propagandizing on behalf of a tyrannical regime steeped in hatred of the values of the United States. Adversity could come from Iran's continued pursuit of nuclear weapons and international terrorism, or its desperate desire to stave off internal regime change, or from its propaganda arms in Qatar and elsewhere pushing anti-Western, anti-American bull. Many politicians and commentators are already showing themselves willing to do anything and everything on behalf of such regimes, up to and including flying cover for radical Islam. Adversity might emanate from chaos in our southern hemisphere, where rogue states like Venezuela were pursuing deeper relations with our enemies until President Trump acted, as we'll get to in a moment, or from Europe, where unchecked immigration, combined with regulatory overreach, threatens to doom an entire continent to stagnation and disarray. Could come from any other variety of sources on the foreign front. The world is a chaotic place. It's a more chaotic place when America is weak, as many on the left and the right wish to make her. Adversity will arise domestically, too. Adversity may come in the form of economic turmoil. While the economy right now appears to be in pretty good shape, nobody knows how the current AI investment cycle will play out in the short term, and economic turmoil brings with it political vultures. Already, we've seen some conservatives turning away from defensive free markets in favor of statism that seems more familiar from the left. And we've seen leftists embracing the most extreme versions of wealth seizure and collectivist centralization. Adversity will certainly originate in the size and scope of our massive and bureaucratic government, which provides extraordinary obstacles to American achievement and overwhelming support to people who are willing to steal from their fellow Americans. Adversity will certainly come, too, in the form of reactionary posturing. Lies told by the left will be mirrored in lies told by the right, and vice versa, resulting in a continued spiral of conspiratorial polarization, totally disconnected from the actual lives of most Americans. Already, we've seen cynical politicians and morally corrupt commentators spew untruths in pursuit of algorithmic momentum, and that is definitely going to accelerate this year. Politicians and commentators reveal themselves in how they react to adversity. So, do they react by telling you the truth, no matter how much their audience might dislike it? Or do they lie to you by telling you the things they think you want to hear? Do they react out of principle or out of convenience? Do they recommend coalitional solidarity at the expense of basic decency and integrity and truth? In other words, do they treat you like a sucker or do they treat you like a citizen? Of course, it's an election year, and that means that we're going to be swamped by lies and prevarications. by a lot of politicians who promise the moon and deliver nothing. We'll be swamped, too, by commentators who suggest that political failure results generally from a lack of Nietzschean will rather than the complicated give and take of normal day-to-day politics, and who say that if you get more outraged, conspiratorial, and angry, somehow our politics will improve. How will we, Americans, react to that adversity, that onslaught of cultivated resentment and Machiavellian manipulation? The American Republic is founded, on the one hand, in a fundamental supposition that human beings are capable of discernment, of acting morally when faced with adversity, of preferring truth to comforting falsehood, of recognizing our own fallibility. And the American Republic is founded, on the other hand, on the reality of human nature's darker side, our tribalism, our venality, our selfishness, all of which, when put together, is why our founders preferred a republic of checks and balances rather than a Francoist dictatorship or a pure democracy. It's why James Madison wrote in Federalist 51, quote, "Ambition must be made to counteract ambition. The interest of the man must be connected with the constitutional rights of the place. It may be a reflection on human nature that such devices should be necessary to control the abuses of government. But what is government itself but the greatest of all reflections on human nature? If men were angels, no government would be necessary. If angels were to govern men, neither external nor internal controls on government would be necessary. In framing a government, which is to be administered by men over men, the great difficulty lies in this. You must first enable the government to control the governed, and in the next place, oblige it to control itself. So, in the end, it's up to us. We have to become better at discernment. We have to act with humility. We, the American people, must discern who is telling us the truth, even when we don't want to hear it, and who is lying to us out of audience capture or political expediency or sycophancy. We have to work to preserve the checks and balances of our system, even checks and balances that might seem to deprive us of temporary power. If we don't, we risk an authoritarian centralization that turns against basic freedom. What's more, we risk an arrogance about our own nature that surely turns to disaster, even if our side seems to have that temporary upper hand. Most of all, we have to remember this. People who promise utopia, an end to adversity, an end to the chaos and turmoil of life, so long as you give them your trust and your power, are providing you a Faustian bargain in which you receive neither utopia nor freedom. Those who tell you that your future is not in your hands and who encourage you to surrender whatever is left of that future to a demoralizing conspiracism, those people are lying to you, and they are lying to you for their own gain. And you deserve better than that, and we all deserve better than that. So, let 2026 be a year of clarity. Let people reveal themselves for who they are and believe them when they show you. And may we all approach the adversities of whatever comes our way with the courage, conviction, and decency that make America truly great. We'll get to everything that just went down in Venezuela in a moment. First, this episode is sponsored by Pure Talk. If your credit card balance is stressing you out after all that holiday spending, I have something that can save you money right now. You can cut your cell phone bill in half by switching to Pure Talk's Saver plan. Just $20 a month for unlimited talk, text, and 3 gigs of high-speed data on Pure Talk's super-fast nationwide 5G network. And as a veteran-led company that cares about giving back to those who serve, if you're active duty or former military or a first responder, you'll save an additional 20% every single month. The easiest way to free up cash flow is to reduce your monthly recurring bills. Start with cutting overpriced wireless and switching to my wireless company. I've been using Pure Talk for years. Obviously, I'm on the phone all the time. My calls are important to me. Best coverage, best price, a company that actually likes people who think conservative. Go to puretalk.com/Shapiro. Make the switch today in as little as 10 minutes. Again, talk, text, data for just $20 a month. That's puretalk.com/Shapiro. You'll save an additional 50% off your very first month. Pure Talk is America's wireless company. Also, the holidays, it's a great time to spend time with family, with your parents. And you realize the things that actually matter are the things that are family related. And the biggest thing is making sure that your family is secure. There's a weight that sits on you when you have a family, making sure they're taken care of. Everything is in place if, God forbid, something happens. Life insurance feels like overwhelming. And when it comes to life insurance, it can feel overwhelming to even know where to start. That's where our sponsor, Policy Genius, comes in. It's an online insurance marketplace where you can compare quotes from top insurers side by side, completely free. No jumping around between websites, no endless phone calls. What really stands out is their team actually works for you. They're licensed agents who actually help you figure out what you need, not what some company just wants to sell you. They walk you through coverage amounts, prices, all of it, no guesswork, just straight answers. They handle the paperwork, they answer your questions, and they just take that weight off your shoulders. You get clarity on what you need, and you can move forward fast. With the new year coming up, it's the perfect time to lock this in and start 2025 with real peace of mind. Check out Policy Genius. They've got thousands of 5-star reviews from people who finally found the right policy for their needs. You'll thank yourself later. With Policy Genius, real users have gotten 20-year, $2 million policies for just $53 a month. Ease the weight of protecting a wonderful life. Head on over to policygenius.com/Shapiro to compare life insurance quotes from top companies, see how much you could save. That's policygenius.com/Shapiro. Okay, now on to the news of the day, which is the news of the year, which is not saying a lot since we are only a few days into the year. But my goodness, the president of the United States has begun 2026 with a bang, literally a bang, because over the course of the last couple of days, the United States deposed Venezuelan dictator Nicolas Maduro by sending in American troops to essentially extradite him to the United States. According to the Wall Street Journal, by the time the sun rose in Caracas, this would have been Saturday morning, Nicolas Maduro's nearly 13-year grip on power had ended. In handcuffs, blindfolded, wearing a gray sweatsuit, he was on a U.S. warship on his way to New York City to face narco-terrorism charges following a 5-hour operation. What happens next isn't clear. We'll get to that in a moment. The mission, apparently, according to the Wall Street Journal, was the culmination of months of secretive planning and a series of mixed signals that allowed the United States to preserve the element of surprise, even though the incursion at times seemed inevitable. Starting late this past summer, intelligence personnel began tracking what Maduro ate and wore, where he lived and traveled, and they were helped apparently by an asset within the Venezuelan leader's inner circle, according to administration officials and others familiar with the operation. We'll get back to who that source was, who they were likely working for, because that has implications for what happens next. Meanwhile, U.S. Special Operations rehearsed, practicing how to extract the Venezuelan president inside a replica of his fortified compound. Apparently, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, CIA Director John Ratcliffe, and Homeland Security Advisor Stephen Miller met regularly to discuss the mission. Trump's advisors were torn about the wisdom of a military operation, and they offered conflicting statements publicly. Military officials told Trump any mistake could result in embarrassing failure, and they warned that some members of the conservative base would be outraged even if it was successful, which we'll get to again in a moment, because there are some pseudo-conservatives who are spending today fulminating about the great evil of the United States taking out one of the worst dictators on planet Earth, and certainly the worst dictator in the Western Hemisphere. President Trump ultimately concluded that Maduro, indicted in the United States, needed to face justice and that his supporters would still back his decision, which, by the way, is true. Apparently, there was a plan in place by late December. Trump tried to pressure Maduro to basically go into exile on his own. He refused. The U.S. thought about doing this on Christmas and also on New Year's Day, but the weather prevented it. And then finally, at 10:46 p.m. on Friday, Operation Absolute Resolve was a go. Here is General Dan Raisin Kane detailing the operational details for Absolute Resolve.
Last night, on the order of the President of the United States and in support of a request from the Department of Justice, as the President said, the United States military conducted an apprehension mission in Caracas, Venezuela, to bring to justice 2 indicted persons, Nicolas and Cecilia Maduro. This operation, known as Operation Absolute Resolve, was discreet, precise, and conducted during the darkest hours of January 2nd and was the culmination of months of planning and rehearsal, an operation that, frankly, only the United States military could undertake. Our interagency work began months ago and built on decades of experience of integrating complex air, ground, space, and maritime operations. While the past 2 decades have honed the skills of our special operations forces, this particular mission required every component of our joint force, with soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, and Guardians working in unison with our intelligence agency partners and law enforcement teammates in an unprecedented operation.
According to the Wall Street Journal, the United States sent overwhelming air power for the operation that included F-18s, F-22s, F-35s, EA-18 Growlers, E-2 Hawkeye command and control aircraft, B-1 bombers. They were tasked with dismantling and disabling Venezuela's air defense systems, which they did highly successfully. Again, Russian defenses were being used by the Venezuelans. Apparently, the Praetorian Guard for Maduro was Cuban. He is propped up by outside regimes, or was. The helicopters, which carried an extraction force and law enforcement officers, at some points flew only 100 feet above the water during the flights into Venezuela, which is astonishing. 1 U.S. aircraft was hit during the operation and remained flyable. It returned home safely. U.S. forces sustained some injuries. No Americans were killed, according to President Trump. At 2:01 local time, according to General Raisin Kane, a U.S. Delta Force team arrived at Maduro's compound. As they approached, the U.S. helicopters came under fire, And American forces then responded with overwhelming force and self-defense. U.S. Special Forces arrived inside Maduro's compound. They exchanged gunfire with Venezuelan personnel. Probably some of those people were Cuban. Maduro and his wife attempted to flee into a steel-reinforced safe room. They were unable to close the door in time. They gave up and they were taken into custody by the Justice Department. President Trump announced the strike at 4:21 a.m. via Truth Social. He said, quote, "The United States has successfully carried out a large-scale strike against Venezuela and its leader, President Nicolas Maduro, who has been, along with his wife, captured and flown out of the country. This operation was done in conjunction with U.S. law enforcement. Details to follow. There will be a news conference at 11 a.m. at Mar-a-Lago. Thank you for your attention to this matter. President Donald J. Trump." Unbelievable. Unbelievable. Here are some of the images from the makeshift situation room that was set up at Mar-a-Lago. As you can see, it's Pete Hegseth. That would be the CIA Director, John Ratcliffe, and the President of the United States, who are sitting in this makeshift operations room watching this thing play out. Another picture, of course, of the President of the United States looking on as the operation takes place. And then you have the President flanked by Secretary of State Marco Rubio and John Ratcliffe, the leader of the CIA. An excellent top team here for the President of the United States, as the success of the mission would seem to suggest. Maduro was then brought aboard the USS Iwo Jima wearing a Nike tracksuit. And of course, they have the ear and eye blackout on him, so he doesn't know quite where he is. There is tape of him being escorted by a swarm of agents in New York onto the tarmac. Any attempt by New York Mayor Zohran Mamdani to prevent all of this was unsuccessful. Here was Nicolas Maduro being escorted onto American soil.
In what looks like maybe a gray or blue sweatshirt. We saw him a little bit earlier on the image that the president posted, blindfolded and handcuffed, and it appears maybe he's still blindfolded in a gray sweatshirt, which would likely come off as blue, given the daylight scenario, the lack of daylight.
Maduro has been transferred to a Manhattan federal courthouse early on Monday, where he is set to appear on charges related to cocaine trafficking. Here is the tape of his perp walk at the DEA New York City headquarters. As you can see, here he is being walked through. I mean, it's an astonishing thing what the President of the United States and the U.S. military just pulled off. And first of all, let's just be clear. The U.S. military is so badass, it's astonishing. I mean, truly amazing. Truly, truly amazing. As the Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, said, FAFO. Right. Nicolas Maduro had been taunting the United States for a very long time, and it turns out that President Trump is not one to be taunted. Here is the Secretary of Defense.
Nicolas Maduro had his chance, just like Iran had their chance, until they didn't and until he didn't. He effed around, and he found out.
Well, fair enough. Secretary of State Marco Rubio echoed that idea. He said, listen, when President Trump says a thing, he means he is going to do the thing.
But I want to be clear about one thing. Nicolas Maduro had multiple opportunities to avoid this. He was provided multiple very, very, very generous offers and chose instead to act like a wild man, chose instead to play around. And the result is what we saw tonight. The other message here is the following. You have a guy, like many people around the world, they like to play games. You have a guy who decides he's going to invite Iran into his country, is going to, do the confiscation of American oil companies, is going to flood our country with gang members, is going to take Americans prisoner and try to hold them for hostage and trade them like he was able to do with the Biden administration. Basically likes to play games all this time and thinks nothing's going to happen. And I hope what people now understand is that we have a president. The 47th president of the United States is not a game player. When he tells you that he's going to do something, when tells you he's going to address a problem, he means it.
This does have major implications for America's pursuit of its own political interests around the world, because what it means is the president is not one to bluff. This is the second major military operation pursued by the Trump administration that involved essentially a few hours of American force, resulting in catastrophic consequences for America's enemies. The first, of course, was last year when the president authorized that B-2 bomber flight into Iran to take out the Fordo nuclear facility, totally upending geopolitics in the region with one airstrike. And now what he's done with Nicolas Maduro in Venezuela. President Trump explained exactly what he is doing. And again, I have been saying for a very long time that President Trump's foreign policy is not isolationism. Anyone who has been telling you that it is isolationism is lying to you. By the way, their view of foreign policy also happens to be wrong about the world, just as a matter of reality, which we'll get to in a little while here. The president was on this program before the election explaining that his foreign policy is peace through strength, that he pursues America's interests in muscular, realist fashion. He's not interested in long-term hundreds of thousands of troops occupying places. He's not interested in Iraq-style occupations, but he is interested in pursuing America's real hard interests in the world, because that does put Americans first. He has always been clear about this. Anybody who, again, has been lying to you about this was doing just that, lying to you. Well, here's President Trump explaining why he just did what he did.
Why is running a country in South America America first?
Well, I think it is because we want to surround ourselves with good neighbors. We want to surround ourselves with stability. We want to surround ourselves with energy. We have tremendous energy in that country. It's very important that we protect it. We need that for ourselves. We need that for the world. And we want to make sure we can protect it.
Why? I mean, it's almost as though the president understands that the United States exists on a globe, and on that globe are many other countries. And we have interests in what happens in those other countries, including in places like Venezuela, or, for example, in Iran, or, for example, in Taiwan, or maybe even, for example, in Eastern Europe and Ukraine. It turns out that the United States, as the world's dominant hegemon, has interests in a lot of different areas. That doesn't mean that we should, of course, be in full-scale occupational war mode in all or any of those areas. It does mean that pretending that an America in retreat, that retreats inside its own borders, makes Americans safer and more prosperous, that is a lie, and that's something the president of the United States understands. Here is the president also explaining over the course of the last 48 hours that, as opposed to Afghanistan, we are no longer a laughingstock, that Joe Biden made us a laughingstock, that Joe Biden's withdrawal from Afghanistan likely led to the invasion of Ukraine by Vladimir Putin. And President Trump says, listen, if our policy is indeed, as the Secretary of War says, FAFO, then fewer people are likely to FA.
Compare this to Afghanistan, where we were a laughingstock all over the world. We're not a laughingstock anymore. No, we have the greatest military in the world by far. We have the greatest military equipment in the world by far.
He is not wrong, of course. Secretary of State Marco Rubio appeared on pretty much all of the Sunday shows and was grilled by a wide variety of reporters, many of whom were very critical of President Trump for not doing anything about Maduro during his first term. Watching everybody flip and suddenly become a Maduro defender, this is President Trump's magical gift politically. Whatever he does, a bunch of people always have to come out in opposition to it. Always. It doesn't matter if he deposes a murderous dictator like Nicolas Maduro. Some people still have to be upset about it. Well, here was the Secretary of State explaining that actually this is in the national interest of the United States.
So now there are other people in charge of the military and police apparatus there. They're going to have to decide now what direction they want to go. And we hope they will choose a different direction than the one Nicolas Maduro picked. Ultimately, we hope this leads to a holistic transition all the way around in Venezuela, societal, political, all of that. We're in favor of all of that. But right now, we have to take the first steps. And the first steps are securing what's in the national interest of the United States and also beneficial to the people of Venezuela. And those are the things that we're focused on right now. No more drug trafficking, no more Iran Hezbollah presence there, and no more using the oil industry to enrich all our adversaries around the world and not benefiting the people of Venezuela, or frankly, benefiting the United States and the region.
President Trump has called this the Don Roe doctrine as opposed to the Monroe doctrine, which I got to say I kind of love. Here's the president of the United States.
All of these actions were in gross violation of the core principles of American foreign policy, dating back more than 2 centuries, and not anymore. All the way back, it dated to the Monroe Doctrines, and the Monroe Doctrine is a big deal, but we've superseded it by a lot, by a real lot. They now call it the Don Roe document. I don't know.
Everything's branded. Everything's branded. It's pretty hysterical. Okay, so to go back for a moment, so people even understand what the hell is going on. Who is Nicolas Maduro? Why does any of this matter? So Nicolas Maduro took over for the strongman Hugo Chavez, who had transitioned Venezuela from an oil-rich democratic state into a socialist dictatorship, totally oppositional to the interests of the United States in 1999. Hugo Chavez died in 2013, and Nicolas Maduro took over as his successor. There has not been a real election in Venezuela for a quarter century. because of Hugo Chavez and Nicolas Maduro. He was responsible for tens of thousands of extrajudicial executions, according to the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights. Typically, I don't cite the UN as a source, but when the UN is critical of left-wing dictators, it's probably true because the UN is, in fact, run by people who are friendly to left-wing dictators as a general rule. Health and hunger crises have likely cost hundreds of thousands of lives. Infant mortality skyrocketed under the Chavez and then under the Maduro regimes. Between 2013 and 2021, when Maduro was already in charge, GDP per capita in Venezuela dropped by 75%. 75%. In 1999, GDP per capita in Venezuela, this is just before Chavez took over, was about $4,000 per year. By 2021, it was $1,500 per year. Today, it is still under $3,000 per capita. And there's no excuse for this because, of course, Venezuela is one of the most resource-rich nations on earth, rich in gold, rich in oil. Oil production dropped from 3.2 million barrels of oil per day in 1999 to 850,000 barrels of oil per day. Again, that is a 75% drop in oil production. Why? Because they nationalized the oil industry. They barred American companies from trafficking in oil, from drilling, from ownership in the oil industry, which meant less production. Because when you nationalize things and then you hand over all the proceeds to your cronies, it turns out things become wildly less productive. Hyperinflation then set in because the government didn't have enough money to pay for all of the services it had promised, so it just started printing money. Over the course of the Chavez and then Maduro regimes, nearly 8 million people, it's like 25% of the entire population, fled Venezuela. In terms of international geopolitics, Maduro was an ally of all of America's enemies. He made common cause with Russia. It was Russian weapons that were supposed to provide air cover for Maduro. Obviously, that failed. They had shipped, the Russians, into Venezuela systems including the S-300VM and Buk M2 missiles, none of which did any good against American forces. China, of course, is a major patron state of Venezuela. They lent them some $50 billion repaid in crude oil. China has some natural resources, but not a lot of oil. They get a lot of it from Venezuela and a lot of it from Iran. 70% of all Venezuelan oil exports went to China. Obviously, the Iran, China, Russia axis is very involved in Venezuela as well. Not only, as you heard the Secretary of State mention, does Iran actually have fighters in Venezuela. Hezbollah actually does work in Venezuela. But Iran sent diluents to process its heavy crude, and Venezuela paid in gold. Iran manufactures suicide drones in Venezuela as well. Okay, so those are all reasons why the United States has an interest. And that's leaving aside the massive drug trafficking into the United States, the massive migration north that has happened because of misgovernance in Venezuela, the fact that Venezuela is a sponsor state of Cuba, which of course exists very short distance from the United States. So what comes next? Well, first we have to sort of determine what happened here. So there are a couple of models for changing regimes in Latin and South America. One model is what I think we just saw in Venezuela. The other model is what we saw in Panama. So a lot of people are likening what we saw in Venezuela over the weekend to what happened in Panama under George H.W. Bush. So there was an invasion of Panama that happened under George H.W. Bush, in which Manuel Noriega, who was the dictator of Panama, was arrested, brought to the United States, charged. And then the regime in Panama was essentially overthrown. Noriega ended up being tried and convicted in the United States on charges of drug trafficking, racketeering, and money laundering, and served 20 years in the U.S., and then was extradited to France. The basis for invading Panama at that time was that Noriega had declared a state of war, and the U.S. had declared a response to an imminent threat. There were about 35,000 Americans living in the Canal Zone. And so the United States took significant action. We had 13,000 troops in the Panama Canal Zone in the first place because we built it. And we added another 14,000 troops. And then we didn't just depose Noriega. We swore in Guillermo Endara, who was the winner of the 1989 election as president, and dismantled the entire Panamanian defense forces and replaced them with the Panamanian public forces. Okay, so that is not what happened here. What happened here is a large-scale airstrike in Caracas, the use of special forces in order to extradite Maduro, and the vice president, who is, in fact, a hard-nosed socialist Machiavellian player named Delcy Rodriguez, who is as bad as Maduro in nearly every way, except that may see reality, maybe more pragmatic than Maduro. She was immediately sworn in and is apparently expressing willingness to cooperate with the United States transition. So what this looks more like is a palace coup. And that brings us back to that statement in the Wall Street Journal that there were sources who were close to Maduro who were giving the United States information. Would not be a surprise at all if those sources were very close to Delcy Rodriguez, the vice president of Venezuela. Now, if Rodriguez remains in power for a long period of time without granting America her interests in Venezuela, then that's the way you can judge whether this is a success or a failure. Do things change in Venezuela? Now, President Trump surprised a lot of people by saying that, for example, the opposition leader in Venezuela, who just won the Nobel Peace Prize, would not be the new leader of Venezuela, at least in the short term, Maria Machado. So President Trump was asked about Machado. He said she's nice, but she doesn't have the support.
Oh, I think it would be very tough for her to be the leader. She doesn't have the support within or the respect within the country. She's a very nice woman, but she doesn't have the respect.
Okay, so what does he mean by that? He doesn't mean that she doesn't actually have the quote-unquote respect. What he actually means is that she does not have control of the military apparatus. And absent the United States inserting tens of thousands of troops to overthrow the Venezuelan military, the United States instead is going to put extraordinary external pressure on Delcy Rodriguez to initiate change. If he had immediately come out, for example, and said, we're going to put Machado in place, that might have started a civil war in Venezuela. It may have required massive American interventionism on the ground. So right now, the Trump administration is going to try and work with Delcy Rodriguez to effectuate that change. Rodriguez, for her part, is already virtue signaling to all of her socialist friends. She's saying the Zionists did this. What can't the Zionists do? My goodness. I mean, really pretty incredible at everything, apparently. But she's doing that. She's, of course, saying it's terrible that the United States took Maduro out. Wink, wink, nod, nod. Okay, in reality, it seems as though the Trump administration is going to use external pressure to get Delcy Rodriguez to open up the oil industry, to maybe make some democratic changes, to transition toward a more orderly system. Here is President Trump suggesting the United States is running Venezuela. And again, people are taking this at face value. People are suggesting this means that Marco Rubio is now dictator of Venezuela. What President Trump, I believe, means that the United States' external pressure on Venezuela will cause the new regime leadership to work with us. And if they don't, there's more where that came from.
So we are going to run the country until such time as we can do a safe, proper, and judicious transition. And it has to be judicious because that's what we're all about. We want peace, liberty, and justice for the great people of Venezuela. And that includes many from Venezuela that are now living in the United States and want to go back to their country. It's their homeland. We can't take a chance that somebody else takes over Venezuela that doesn't have the good of the Venezuelan people in mind.
And so what he means there is we're going to keep our boot on the throat of Delcy Rodriguez and the administration there. And again, he's warning her. He says, listen, if you don't do what we want you to do, then maybe we'll do it again, right? We don't want boots on the ground there, but if you don't do what we want you to do, then there might be boots on the ground. We're not going to telegraph what we're doing.
Does the U.S. running the country mean that U.S. troops will be on the ground? How will that work?
Well, they always say boots on the ground. Oh, so we're not afraid of boots on the ground if we have to have. We had boots on the ground last night at a very high level, actually. We're not afraid of it. We don't mind saying it.
Again, that is him saying F around and find out. Marco Rubio was asked by Kristen Welker over at NBC about President Trump's comments on quote-unquote running Venezuela, and here's what the Secretary of State had to say.
It's running policy. The policy with regards to this. We want Venezuela to move in a certain direction because not only do we think it's good for the people of Venezuela, it's in our national interest. It either touches on something that's a threat to our national security or touches on something that's either beneficial or harmful.
And are you involved in that transition,
so obviously
Secretary?
I'm very involved in this. Well, of course. I mean, I think everyone knows I'm pretty involved on politics in this hemisphere. Obviously, as Secretary of State and National Security Advisor, very involved in all these elements. The Department of War plays a very important role here, along with the Department of Justice, for example, because they're the ones that have to go to court. So this is a team effort by the entire national security apparatus of our country, but it is running this policy.
Okay, so again, Secretary of State Rubio, by the way, coming off amazingly well in all of this. Have to say, this is a huge moment for Secretary of State Rubio. President Trump suggested that, yes, there are some hard American interests at stake here, including oil. Right? It is pretty amazing that President Trump just says all the quiet parts out loud. And frankly, I think it's good. Yes, America has an interest in Venezuelan oil that we opened up in the first place. Let us be clear. It was American companies that opened the Venezuelan oil industry. Here's President Trump saying this.
In addition, Venezuela unilaterally seized and stole American oil, American assets, and American platforms, costing us billions and billions of dollars. They did this a while ago, but we never had a president that did anything about it. They took all of our property. It was our property. We built it.
Okay, he's right about that. He says that it is a priority for the United States to rebuild Venezuela's energy infrastructure, and that will create gains in the economy for Venezuelans, which of course is true. President Trump was also asked what happens next, and he said, listen, it's not just Venezuela. Countries had better start doing what is in America's interest, or there might be changes there as well. He was asked about the country of Colombia, and he had these comments.
Colombia is very sick, too, run by a sick man who likes making cocaine and selling it to the United States, and he's not going to be doing it very long, let me tell you.
What does that mean? He's not going to be doing it very long.
He's not doing it very long. He has cocaine mills and cocaine factories. He's not going to be doing it very long.
So there will be an operation by the U.S.
It sounds good to me. Yeah. You know why? Because they kill a lot of people.
Yeah, he is right about that. He also says that Cuba is on shaky footing, which of course it is. They required a lot of Venezuelan money in order to prop up that regime as well.
Are you considering U.S. action in Cuba?
We're not. I think it's just going to fall. I don't think we need any action. It looks like it's going down. It's going down for the count. You ever watch a fight?
I have.
They go down for the count. And Cuba looks like it's going down.
Okay, so, again, fascinating to watch all this play out. Now, there's some people who have asked the legal question. What is the legal basis for this? So let's be clear. When people say there is a violation of international law, no one cares. There is no such thing as international law. It is nonsense. It is nonsense because there is no enforcement mechanism. You know what international law really is? The law of the jungle. The reality is that the strong do what they will and the weak do what they must. That is the law of international relations. There is no alternative to it. All attempts to establish some alternative to it have failed, which is why self-defense is necessary and why a strong military is necessary for powerful Western states and why a stronger America in the world is better for the world. I saw a hilarious post by somebody who said, well, now that we've done this, what's to stop China from morally attempting to take Taiwan? I wasn't aware that China was bound by our moral strictures. If they were, I don't think that they would be China, actually. I don't think that Russia is waiting around for our opinions. They're just doing what they want. And the thing that stops them is us, not our moral suasion. On a moral level, by the way, taking out a communist dictator who has impoverished his people and destroyed his country is, in fact, morally superior to taking out, say, a democratic leader in another country who is not doing any of those things. Sort of bizarre moral relativism that is set in on both the horseshoe left and the isolationist right is pretty astonishing to watch. There's the question of American domestic law. Like, on what basis was the United States supposed to do this domestically? Should Congress have been notified? So the Secretary of State says we couldn't notify Congress without endangering the mission, which of course is true, and it is a short-term mission. Under the War Powers Act, Congress has 60 days once notified about some sort of war action to sign off on the war or defund the war. This is a military intervention, but it is not, in fact, a full-scale invasion or a complete, quote-unquote, war on Venezuela. It is a mission that was successful, and now we'll see where it goes. Here's Marco Rubio explaining.
We call members of Congress immediately after. This was not the kind of mission that you can do congressional notification on. It was a trigger-based mission in which conditions had to be met night after night. We watched and monitored that for a number of days. So it's just simply not the kind of mission you can call people and say, hey, we may do this at some point in the next 15 days. But it's largely a law enforcement function. Remember, at the end of the day, at its core, this was an arrest of 2 indicted fugitives of American justice, and the Department of War supported the Department of Justice in that job. Now, there are broader policy implications here, but it's just not the kind of mission that you can pre-notify because it endangers the mission.
Secretary of State Rubio also put up a statement on Twitter saying that Maduro is not, in fact, a legitimate government. He is not the president of Venezuela. His regime is not the legitimate government. Maduro is the head of the Cartel de las Solas, a narco-terror organization which has taken over possession of a country. He's under indictment for pushing drugs into the United States. Pam Bondi, the Attorney General, put out a similar statement saying that Maduro is going to face the full wrath of American justice. that he's been charged with narco-terrorism conspiracy, cocaine importation conspiracy, possession of machine guns and destructive devices, and conspiracy to possess machine guns and destructive devices against the United States. They will soon face the full wrath of American justice on American soil in American courts, according to Pam Bondi. According to the Barr memo, which is a very famous memo written by William Barr about the Panamanian change of regime in 1989, the argument was that the president can order the FBI to investigate and arrest individuals in foreign countries, that the UN Charter is a non-binding advisory document that is secondary to domestic law, and that there are no Fourth Amendment protections to apply to foreign citizens abroad. Jonathan Turley has a good piece over at Fox News explaining why this doesn't run up against legal guardrails. The Democrats, of course, are whining about all of this. After Barack Obama bombed Libya, after Joe Biden got us involved in funding Ukraine. Like there are a lot of things that have happened here that would amount to warlike action under various Democratic presidents that did not end with congressional authorization. So now the shoe is on the other foot. Let's be real about this. The idea that Congress is the war-declaring body at this point in American history is just not true on an effectual level. And it hasn't been true for decades, really since World War II. So as Jonathan Turley points out, Noriega does not have any sort of diplomatic immunity. He says, legally, Trump has the upper hand in this case. Maduro will replay arguments from the Noriega case, but he has very little actual basis for that in law in terms of his legal extradition. Well, the international reaction is predictable. All the countries that love Maduro are very upset, and everybody else is pretty happy that Maduro is gone. Venezuelans around the world are very happy he's gone. Here's some footage of Venezuelans celebrating from around the world. Now, again, you have the huge crowds. Not a giant shock. Venezuelans everywhere despise Nicolas Maduro and Hugo Chavez for having destroyed their country. Hilariously, there was a Chinese delegation there to meet with Maduro on Friday morning, and they were stuck in the country while all of this was going on. Whoopsie, it didn't go amazing for them. Meanwhile, the EU President Ursula von der Leyen put out a statement saying that they stand by the people of Venezuela. Quote, following very closely the situation in Venezuela, we stand by the people of Venezuela and support a peaceful and democratic transition. Any solution must respect international law and the UN Charter, yada, yada, yada. Well, you didn't do anything. So between international law and the UN Charter and $5, you could buy a cup of coffee, or you could wait for the United States military to do the thing that all of you have been too spineless to do for, a full generation of humans. Keir Starmer, the socialist prime minister of the UK, he emphasized that the UK had no involvement in any of this.
What I can say is that the UK was not involved in any way in this operation. And as you'd expect, we're focusing on British nationals in Venezuela and working very closely with our embassy. And so I will want to talk to the president, I will want to talk to allies, but at the moment, I think we need to establish the facts.
And meanwhile, the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs is very upset because there is not a dictatorship on earth that is antithetical to American interests. The Russians do not support. They put out a statement, quote, in view of the confirmed reports about Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro and his spouse being in the United States, we strongly urge the United States leadership to reconsider their position and release the legitimately elected president of a sovereign country and his spouse. He is not legitimately elected. He is, in fact, a narco-terrorist criminal. He is a dictator of a country who has ruined his country, and listening to the Russians jabber on about the legitimacy of elections in Venezuela is like O.J. Simpson talking about spousal love. Meanwhile, the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs put out a condemnation as well when they weren't apparently, watching out the windows of their hotel as America just took Maduro out. Quote, China is deeply shocked and strongly condemns the U.S.'s blatant use of force against a sovereign state in action against its president. Man, somebody should talk to Hong Kong. Such hegemonic acts of the U.S. seriously violate international law. Oh, ho, ho. The Chinese invoking international law. Well, chaining up the Uyghurs and threatening Taiwan. And they threaten peace and security in Latin America and the Caribbean region. China firmly opposes it. Yes, China, which has spread chaos all over the planet, throughout Asia, Africa, and Latin America. We call on the U.S. to abide by international law. This, by the way, should, for those who care, be a good and informational point about the uselessness of international law. If Russia and China can invoke it to their own benefit, It is not worth the paper that it is printed on. Meanwhile, Mexico's president, Claudia Sheinbaum, condemned all of this. The Mexican government put out a statement, again calling on the United States to, quote unquote, respect international law. Listen, any international law that says that Nicolas Maduro must remain as the dictator of Venezuela, forcing his people to eat dog in the streets, I think that's bad. I'll put it out there. I don't think that that's law that is worth its salt. And then, of course, Mexico's Claudia Sheinbaum urged the United Nations to act to help de-escalate the situation. President Trump did respond to this. He said, she's a nice lady, but the cartels run Mexico, so she can sit down.
Well, it wasn't meant to be, and we're very friendly with her. She's a good woman, but the cartels are running Mexico. She's not running Mexico. The cartels are running Mexico. And we could be politically correct and be nice and say, oh, yes, she is. No, she's very, she's very frightened of the cartels. They're running Mexico. And I've asked her numerous times, would you like us to take out the cartels? No, Mr. President. No, please.
Well, again, he ain't wrong. And putting America's enemies on notice is a great way of making them do the things that are in American citizens' interests. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs for Qatar, which is effectively the press agency for Iran, expressed its own deep concern when not stuffing its money into the pockets of a wide variety of political figures. Quote, the state of Qatar expresses its deep concern over the current developments in the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela, calling in this context for restraint, de-escalation, and the adoption of dialogue as the appropriate means to address all outstanding issues. Well, part of that is because, of course, Qatar has tried to act as a go-between. As always, they insert themselves as a go-between between notorious regimes in the United States and then pretend they're useful, which they typically are not. And then they say that they are ready to contribute to any international effort aimed at achieving an immediate, peaceful solution. Oh, isn't that nice? Isn't that nice? That's just delightful. Meanwhile, domestically, the horseshoe reaction has begun. AOC and MTG linking up hands. Those of the acronyms linking up hands. Quote, this is Alexander Ocasio-Cortez. It's not about drugs. If it was, Trump wouldn't have pardoned one of the largest narco traffickers in the world last month. It's about oil and regime change. And they need a trial now to pretend that it isn't, especially to distract from Epstein and skyrocketing healthcare. Okay, so her theory is that this is a gigantic wag the dog, which of course it is not, and is not going to, quote unquote, distract from things like healthcare costs. That's silly. Hey, I'm unaware as to, I understand she likes socialism, like really, really likes socialism. But if you were smart, if you're on the left and you were smart, you would say, yeah, it's actually quite good that Nicolas Maduro is gone. I've been reliably informed by all of our democratic socialist friends that Venezuela is a bad example of a socialist republic, that really they want Norway or Denmark. And yet so many of them are out there defending Nicolas Maduro today. It's so weird. Meanwhile, isolationists like Marjorie Taylor Greene are out there trying to make hay. Marjorie Taylor Greene, again, it is amazing that all you have to do to earn strange new respect from the press, you can be the dumbest member of Congress, which Marjorie Taylor Greene assuredly was. Truly a dumb human. And the media will treat you as that until precisely the moment at which you yell at President Trump, at which point you become a worthy guest on Meet the Press to discuss foreign affairs. Quick, Marjorie, name 5 countries in South America. Go. Here's Marjorie Taylor Greene on Meet the Press.
And, you want to know something? After this regime change in Venezuela, I fear that we're going to see jobs just move south because we're already hearing about big corporations lining up their trips to Venezuela for the next big business opportunity that exists, while Americans sit here with no options that are going to provide them with good paying jobs and affordable health care.
So her economic theory is that by opening up the oil fields of Venezuela to American development, we're going to lose American jobs? This is her stupid idea? This one? She also put out a statement, by the way, and I only point this out because she is indicative of a strain of pseudo-Republican thought that really is just a chaos agent inside the Republican Party. Mocking President Trump, she says, quote, we are running Venezuela now. And then she put up the hand to face emoji, America first, sarcasm. And then she put out a statement suggesting, quote, in 2024, we voted for America to stop being the world's police, funding foreign wars and murdering innocent people and funding fraud scams and foreigners led in America. We voted against America Last. So it's America Last now to actually secure America's oil interests in Venezuela or to relieve the pressure on Venezuela so that, millions of Venezuelans living in the United States might be able to go back to their home country. So, I suppose that if this is the direction that they want to move, they can. Marjorie Taylor Greene linking up with AOC, not a shock. Here's the horseshoe. Meanwhile, Rashida Tlaib is yelling at President Trump, suggesting it's a war for oil. Here's the thing. That doesn't work when the president of the United States just says, yes, actually oil is in our interest. All right.
Another American regime change war. And what's more disgusting about this is they're not even hiding it anymore. It is about oil. And most likely Trump and many of his donor base are going to benefit personally from this. And even more shameful is the fact that I work with colleagues, now being a member of Congress, I see it firsthand. Colleagues are going to be very silent or pretend they're against us or won't even support the War Powers Resolution before them, primarily because they benefit personally, not only through stock ownership through war manufacturing and private defense contractors, but many of them get direct donations from these oil companies.
What, my goodness. What terrible dictatorship will she not uphold? Truly, it's incredible. Meanwhile, Zoran Mamdani, the mayor of New York, put out his own statement, quote, I was briefed this morning on the U.S. military capture of Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro and his wife. No, you weren't, doof. No, you went, I was briefed. You went on Twitter like everybody else. Yeah, I'm sure that the Trump administration called up Zoran Mamdani and they're like, Zoran, we need to tell you about what's going down in Venezuela right now. And then he said, unilaterally attacking a sovereign nation is an act of war and a violation of federal and international law. Man, somebody should tell him about what Hamas did on October 7th. This blatant pursuit of regime change doesn't just affect those abroad. It directly impacts New Yorkers, including tens of thousands of Venezuelans who call the city home. Okay, so Mamdani is claiming this is bad for Venezuelans. I suggest you take a poll of Venezuelans in New York and see how they feel about all of this. Meanwhile, Chuck Schumer, demonstrating his own hypocrisy, the Senate minority leader, here was Chuck Schumer in 2020, chiding President Trump for not being harsh enough on Maduro. And then here he was yesterday, chiding the president for taking out Maduro.
And the president brags about his Venezuela policy? Give us a break. He hasn't brought an end to the Maduro regime. The Maduro regime is more powerful today and more entrenched today than it was when the president began.
It was reckless. It was dangerous. And looking at the president's demeanor, he didn't even seem to be aware of how dangerous and reckless it is. Let me be clear. Maduro is an illegitimate dictator, but launching military action without congressional authorization, without a credible plan for what comes next is reckless.
Just call it a drone strike from Barack Obama, and he's fine with it. These people are pathetic, truly. Bernie Sanders, who again has never met a socialist dictator he does not adore, put out a long statement that I will not read the entirety of because it's boring. Quote, Donald Trump has once again shown his contempt for the Constitution and the rule of law. This guy does not get to talk about the Constitution. There is no one with more contempt for the Constitution than Senator Socialist Bernie Sanders. The president of the United States does not have the right to unilaterally take this country to war, even against a corrupt and brutal dictator like Maduro. The United States does not have the right, as Trump stated this morning, to run Venezuela. Congress must immediately pass a war powers resolution to end this illegal military operation and reassert its constitutional responsibility. Well, the operation's over. I mean, that's fine. Trump's attack on Venezuela will make the United States and the world less safe. Less safe. Explain. Truly. So Bernie Sanders goes on, this brazen violation of international law gives a green light to any nation on earth that may wish to attack another country to seize their resources or change their governments. Again, this is the idiot logic. So I noticed that Russia attacked Ukraine without us doing anything about Venezuela. And that, in fact, us withdrawing from Afghanistan contributed to that. I noticed China making some pretty bold moves around Taiwan, and they weren't waiting for us to do anything about Venezuela. Idiot logic from idiots. Truly, truly amazing. And of course, not restricted to people on the left. I offer you the genius of foreign policy analyst John Mearsheimer in November of 2025, somebody brought forth consistently by Tucker Carlson as an expert on foreign relations, who says that the United States is incapable of toppling Maduro.
I argue in my book that, land power is usually the way you have to go when you go to war against a country. And I think that's true here. I think, we got rid of Saddam Hussein. How did we do it? We had to invade Iraq. And then we had to search around the country, find the guy, and kill him, and then do social engineering. Do you want to do that in Venezuela? I don't think so. And I don't think Trump wants to do it. It's not what his base wants to do. So all of this is a long way of saying, I find it hard to believe that he's going to do anything substantial from a military point of view against Venezuela. I wouldn't be surprised if he tried to work out a deal with Maduro. Because just, a pinprick type attack is not going to buy him very much. And people will point that out to him. And therefore, it just makes more sense to back off, cut a deal.
Probably should keep listening to the schmuck who hasn't been right for, 20 years or so. Or maybe we should listen to the guy who said in October that the only people who want regime change in Venezuela are globo homo. Oh, yes. Here we go.
Nicolas Maduro and his government are very left-wing on economics. Not on social policy, by the way, which is kind of interesting. In Venezuela, gay marriage is banned. Abortion is banned. Sex changes for transgenderism are banned. It's one of the very few countries in the entire hemisphere with those policies. It is on social policy, not defending the regime, just saying, one of the most conservative countries in North or South or Central America. Only El Salvador really comes close, which is much smaller, of course. And by the way, the U.S.-backed opposition leader who would take Maduro's place if he were taken out is, of course, pretty eager to get gay marriage in Venezuela. So to those of you who thought this whole project was globo homo, not crazy, actually.
So apparently Donald Trump, J.D. Vance, Secretary of State Rubio, Pete Hegseth, new additions to globo homo happening every day. Yeah, but by the way, the reason that Venezuela is socially conservative is because it is Catholic, and abortion has been banned in Venezuela since 1926. So yeah, that was not because of Nicolas Maduro and his wonderful social conservatism. As some of us were saying, who gives a about that particular point, a few weeks ago when referring to Nicolas Maduro, one of the worst dictators in the Western Hemisphere. Joining me on the line is Daniel DiMartino, born and raised in Venezuela. He has lived through the consequences of Maduro socialism firsthand. He's a fellow at the Manhattan Institute and a PhD candidate in economics at Columbia University. Daniel, thanks so much for taking the time. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Ben.
So why don't we begin with what people should know about the rule of Nicolas Maduro? What was Venezuela like being in Venezuela? You're from Venezuela, obviously. What was life like under Hugo Chavez, Nicolas Maduro?
Well, it was a slow but very obvious transition away from being really almost a first world country to being a third world country. From you can purchase everything you need to having to line up, and then from having to put your fingerprint in a government scanning machine at the grocery store so that the cashier could tell you what you're allowed to purchase based on your government quota. I call it high-tech communism because at least we had fingerprint scanning machines, unlike the Cubans. They only had pieces of paper. So things like that, no water, no electricity, the internet becoming rarer and rarer, and then ultimately just extreme poverty. My family went from making $2,000 or $3,000 a month to $100.
So when you look at what the Trump administration just did, obviously the taking of Nicolas Maduro back to the United States, the deposing of him, but the leaving in place of his vice president for the moment. What do you think the future looks like there? I mean, there's a lot of questions about the fact that the opposition leader Machado was not put in place. It doesn't seem as though she had the level of support in the military that would have allowed for that. My supposition right now is that the United States is working with the vice president of Venezuela, who is a socialist dictator herself, would-be dictator herself. Her brother runs the Venezuelan Assembly. They're both pretty dire characters. But it seems to me that what the United States is basically doing is ratcheting up the pressure on the number two and saying, if you don't do what we want, then we'll do the same thing to you that we just did to Nicolas Maduro. You have to moderate. You have to allow the United States to pursue oil interests, allow American companies to work in Venezuela, and then transition toward democracy. Is that your read on the situation?
Yes, but it's important that the transition to democracy happen very quickly. Because if it doesn't, what is Delcy's goal? Delcy's goal is to lengthen this process until Trump leaves, and then Why would an oil company invest in Venezuela so that when Trump leaves, Delcy takes everything away from them? And it's important to give some background on who Delcy and Jorge are. Delcy's father, Jorge Rodriguez Sr., was a terrorist, a Marxist terrorist who kidnapped an American CEO for 3 years. And that's why he died. So Delcy, even more than Maduro, has been brainwashed since he was born into this evil. And so, but I do trust, I gotta say, I do trust Secretary of State Marco Rubio. He knows this issue very well. Trump gave him charge of this whole situation. He knows who Delcy Rodriguez is. He knows their tactics. The question is, will Delcy and the rest of the regime do the right thing? Will they leave peacefully and hold new elections or give power to Maria Corina and her team in the next couple of months? Or will there need to be a second strike?
So when you look at what the United States just did, obviously Maduro being gone makes an enormous difference. You're seeing celebration in the streets. The assumption seems to be on the part of Venezuelans that there will be the sort of transition. But as you say, the next step matters an awful lot. The president of the United States doesn't have the desire, presumably, to put hundreds of thousands or tens of thousands of troops into Venezuela. What do you think the prospects are of the kind of change coming from the Rodriguez regime that the United States was unable to achieve from the Maduro regime?
Well, I think that they thought at the beginning, to be honest, that Trump was bluffing. They didn't think he was going to do this. They didn't think he was going to be successful. You know, many presidents have threatened this. Maduro just had nothing to lose. He was protected by Cubans, as we saw. Most of the people who died were Cuban, were not even Venezuelan. They were Cuban security guards, which is exactly what we had been warning about for so long. And so now the question is, Delcy understands there's a credible threat on her life and on those around her. Will she take all her riches and go to Russia? Which country will welcome them? Maybe Russia won't, right? Maybe they're afraid to go to Russia. Maybe it will be Qatar, their pal. Maybe it will be some other place. I think it would be very useful for the Department of State to negotiate with a foreign dictatorship other than Venezuela to give safe haven to these people. Take all the money, really. Look, as a Venezuelan, Ben, they can take everything, all the money. A country does not become rich because of its natural resources, even though obviously it helps. It becomes rich because of its freedom. And that's what we need to achieve. So I'm happy to let them get amnesty, but they need to leave and transition orderly. And if not, I absolutely would support, of course, a second strike.
So we're speaking with Daniel DiMartino. He has a great piece over at Daily Wire called Why Venezuelans Are Dancing in the Streets, and he is from Venezuela originally. Again, this is a pretty amazing piece of news to come out over the course of the last couple of weeks, and we all have hope that the Trump administration is going to follow through and ensure that the first sprigs of freedom actually turn into a forest here as opposed to being eviscerated by the current regime. Daniel, thanks so much for the time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, man.
Okay, meanwhile, is this having an impact in other places on Earth? Absolutely. So there's a lot of roiling in Iran right now. Protests have been ongoing for the last week and a half. There's basically no water. There's no electricity. People do not have the basic necessities of life because the Ayatollah regime is a terrible regime. And so riots have begun once again. Apparently some 41 people have been killed in these riots so far. The president of the United States said if Iran goes around killing protesters the way that it has in the past, there will be consequences for that. And again, do I think that the president means hundreds of thousands of people from the U.S. military occupying Tehran? No, I don't, because I'm not a moron. And people who tell you that that's what the president means are once again lying to you. But if the Ayatollahs feel as though they cannot crack down on the protesters because there might be an F-35 that takes out an IRGC facility, well, then maybe that regime has some troubles as well.
We're watching it very closely. If they start killing people like they have in the past, I think they're going to get hit very hard by the United States.
Well, that seems to me, again, a good piece of American foreign policy assuring America's interests in the Middle East. Apparently, according to the Times of the UK, Iran's Ayatollah Ali Khamenei has a backup plan to flee the country if his security forces fail to suppress protests or desert, according to an intelligence report shared with the Times. Khamenei, by the way, is 86. My guess is that there is a lot of searching going on by Western powers for some sort of number 2 or number 3 in the IRGC to depose Khamenei and move to some sort of transitional regime in Iran. That would not be a surprise at all. Okay, meanwhile, in the other big news of the day, Tim Walz, is dropping out of the gubernatorial race. Man, what a fall he has had. So he went from the hot new thing selected by Kamala Harris as her VP candidate to making a goof of himself on the national stage to going back to Minnesota, where it turns out that actually people are upset with him because he has presided over the mass defrauding of the Minnesota taxpayer. So Tim Walz today announced that he would not be running for re-election in Minnesota. The Kalshi markets, Kalshi is a sponsor of the program, the Kalshi market suggests that Amy Klobuchar is the likeliest next nominee for Minnesota governor by the Democratic Party, with Keith Ellison running a distant second. That makes some sense. Amy Klobuchar is well liked in the state of Minnesota. Tim Walz announced he was ending his campaign for re-election. According to Axios, he had announced in September that he would run for an unprecedented third term, but he has bad approval ratings and a lot of intensified scrutiny into fraud in statewide programs. House Speaker Lisa DeMuth on the Republican side of the aisle was looking at possibly running there because of that weakness. Again, all of that followed on a video from an internet personality named Nick Shirley. He basically drove around Minneapolis looking for child and daycare facilities that were being funded by government money, trying to find out whether there are actually any kids there. Now, there's not actually anything new there per se. I mean, he went around and the video is pretty evocative. It's unclear exactly how many of these facilities have children. Some of them presumably do. There have been reports from places like the Minneapolis Star-Tribune that some of the facilities, in fact, do have kids there, that he went during off hours, that they didn't let him in because he was a stranger. You don't let kids in, you don't let strangers into daycare facilities. Apparently, some of the 10 daycares the YouTube content creator blasted for having no children invited reporters in to see for themselves. That does not end, however, the gigantic scandal that is the amount defrauded from the Minnesota taxpayers. However, the Minneapolis Star-Tribune did say that 7 of the facilities that Nick Shirley visited have been cited for safety and administrative violations within the past 4 years, some of them dozens of times. One of them that featured in Nick Shirley's video was a place called Quality Learning Center. Hilariously, the sign was misspelled, said Quality Learning Center. It had received 121 violations in the past 3 years alone. 5 of the facilities that Shirley visited were meal sites for Feeding Our Future, which was, of course, the pandemic fraud scandal that resulted in 50 convictions. The manager of Quality Learning Center then tried to claim that Shirley came outside of operating hours. They've been operating for 8.5 years. And I think most hilariously, one of the members of a Somali-run daycare facility came out and said their documents had actually been stolen. Whoopsie. Somebody broke in and stole the exact documents necessary in order to prove that they weren't defrauding the federal government. Bottom line here is that the amount of fraud in Minnesota based on these gigantic state programs has resulted in a pause on a funding stream that provides $185 million in annual aid to the state's daycare centers because of federal investigations into Somali-led fraud in the state of Minnesota. According to the New York Times, more than a dozen schemes have come to light in Minnesota in recent years, many of them involving people of Somali origin. Prosecutors say the schemes have cost taxpayers billions of dollars. The scandal has rattled Minnesota politics and drawn the ire of the White House. And again, Shirley's video brought attention to a thing. Some of the claims made are so far unsubstantiated. Some of them, however, have led to further substantiation of the fact that many of these daycare facilities are at the very least poorly run bleep shows that should not be on government funding. And to be fair, in a sentence I will rarely say, to be fair to legacy media, all the way back in October 2024, there was a piece from CNN titled, "As Fraud Scandals Erupt in Minnesota on Governor Tim Walz's Watch, Accountability is in Short Supply." Quote, "When confronted with troubling examples of waste, fraud, and abuse, some state agencies working under the administration of Democratic Governor Tim Walz repeatedly minimized or dismissed the allegations, according to the state's nonpartisan auditor, Judy Randall." So Walz has presided over extraordinary fraud in the system. And now Tim Walz is not running for re-election, which is, in fact, one of the proper solutions politically to truly running this thing like a bleep show. Alrighty, folks, the show continues for our members right now. Much more to get to, including, is there going to be another government shutdown at the end of this month? Remember, in order to watch, you have to be a member. If you're not a member, become a member. Use code Shapiro at checkout for 2 months free on all annual plans. Click that link in the description and join us. A controversial shooting by an ICE agent at a Minneapolis driver who may have been aiming her car at him. We'll get into all the legal details, and the left goes insane. I mean, truly insane over ICE. It's dangerous and it's wrong. We'll get into all of that. Also, President Trump makes a sort of strange executive order with regard to housing and another strange executive order with regard to military pay. We'll get to all of that in a moment. First, over the weekend, the U.S. military carried out a covert operation that captured Venezuelan dictator Nicolas Maduro and his wife. No American casualties, no leaks. The entire mission was over in just 88 minutes. You want to know how that actually happened? Watch as Mary Margaret Olohan takes you inside the intelligence, planning, and execution of a real U.S. military operation carried out under cover of darkness. She'll actually be joining the show later on to discuss. From months of CIA tracking to cyber operations that shut down power and air defenses to helicopters delivering elite commandos into a fortified military base, this is not speculation. It's not punditry. It's a minute-by-minute account of how modern warfare actually works. How to Take Out a Dictator in 88 Minutes is now streaming at dailywire.com. Check it out.
For more than 200 years, the United States military has lived by a very simple doctrine. We run the Western Hemisphere. And on January 3rd, the United States military unambiguously reminded the world that they are still in charge. This is Caracas, Venezuela, on the night that elite U.S. Special Forces team captured Venezuelan dictator Nicolas Maduro and his wife in the riskiest operation since SEAL Team 6 killed Osama bin Laden. The mission lasted 88 minutes. It was widely considered flawless.
This was one of the most stunning, effective, and powerful displays of American military might and competence in American history.
So, how did they do it?
Well, last night in Minneapolis, a terrible situation unfolded when a woman was shot under disputed circumstances. We're going to go through the video, and we're going to determine whether this woman was shot justifiably or not by an ICE officer. Basically, this all arose, according to the Wall Street Journal, during an ICE operation in Minneapolis. That ICE operation was designed to go after Somali immigrants who were here illegally. According to the New York Times, one day before, a federal agent shot and killed a 37-year-old woman in Minneapolis. Federal immigration officers described their presence in Minneapolis as the largest operation to date. The ICE effort there is part of a broader immigration crackdown that has swept cities across the country. Of course, federal authorities had said a little bit earlier this week they would increase their presence in the Minneapolis region with about 2,000 federal agents from Department of Homeland Security expected to participate. The original immigration enforcement operation focused on Somalis with final deportation orders, meaning they were here illegally. So, while an ICE operation was going on in Minneapolis, this woman, whose name was Renee Nicole Good, 37-year-old woman, apparently blocked ICE officers with her car as they were pushing their vehicle that got stuck in the snow. We're going to hear descriptions of varying degrees from the federal authorities, people like Department of Homeland Security head Kristi Noem, the President of the United States, President Trump, and also the governor of Minnesota, the mayor of Minneapolis. These accounts are really going to vary. We do have several camera angles of the actual incident. According to the Minneapolis Police Chief Brian O'Hara, the woman was blocking the roadway when a federal law enforcement officer approaches her on foot. The vehicle either begins to drive off or is aimed at an officer in front of the car. And that's really the question. 2 shots were fired before the vehicle crashed. She was found with a gunshot wound to the head and pronounced dead at a local hospital. The FBI says that it is investigating the incident. So we're now going to go through the footage. Of course, the footage is disturbing because whenever somebody is killed on camera, it's very disturbing stuff. The big question here is, again, whether the officer in question had an objectively reasonable assessment that he was under imminent threat of serious physical violence. And so what this has come down to is not the question of whether the woman in the car was intending to hit him with the car. Right? That is her intent. Her intent is not relevant to the actual question at play here. The question is whether the officer reasonably assessed that he was at physical risk of harm in this situation. So here is the first video that came out. You can see that there are a bunch of cars that are parked on the side of the roadway. Apparently, this woman is in the car. She seems to be waving certain vehicles through, telling people to go ahead. And then a federal law enforcement officer gets out of a truck, walks up to the car, tells the woman to get out of the car. She pulls back, and then as she pulls ahead, there's an officer who is in front of the car. There's an officer to the front left of the car. He appears to be basically on the bumper. And as she pulls forward, he shoots through the windshield and kills her. We're learning that you can hear the woman who's yelling in the video. That woman who's yelling in the video is the wife of this other woman. And she's standing outside and she's filming, which is something that some of these activists like to do, this sort of legal observer routine, which again is not an actual status in law. This woman was shot twice, apparently in the head, and then the car speeds forward and crashes into a telephone pole. So the question here is, again, whether this ICE officer was at risk of physical violence when this went down. So that is the original full tape. Some people watching the original full tape come to the conclusion that the officer wasn't really in physical risk of harm, that he's off sort of to the side, and that he could have stepped out of the way, or he should have perceived that she was attempting to avoid him. And then the opposing case, which I think is the more legally reasonable and defensible case, is that it doesn't matter what she was intending to do, whether she was trying to drive around him or not. If you drive a car at an officer in defiance of law, doesn't matter what you intended to do. If you're hitting an officer with your car, with the corner of the car, if the officer is in front of your car and you hit the gas, at that point, you've taken your life into your own hands. And this is a legally justifiable homicide. Here is another angle of the shooting. This one is closer to the front of the car. So the first angle is sort of from the back of the car, so it's hard to see where the officer is in relation. This one looks a lot more violent, right? This angle seems a lot clearer, and you can see that the car seems to push forward and nudge the officer, or could have nailed the officer, depending on if the wheels had caught. The slow motion of the incident makes that a little bit clearer as well. The slow motion of the incident shows that the direction of the tire when the woman who was shot hit the gas is, in fact, at the officer. So you can see the car is backing up, the wheel is turned, and there's another officer still in front of the car. The wheel sort of doesn't catch because the roads are wet. But when he shoots, when he pulls his gun, he doesn't pull his gun until the moment that she starts to move forward again. He pulls his gun when he sees that she's pulling forward, and the front left wheel is directed at the officer. Then it turns and seems to avoid the officer. So that is the tape. On the legal side of this, the question is sort of what is the governing law? According to Andy McCarthy, writing for National Review, he says if it is reasonable to construe the woman's action as a deliberate attempt to mow down an ICE agent with a speeding vehicle, the use of force was justified. But even if the woman was mainly trying to get away, which it looks like to him, and again, I think that you can make that case, she was still engaged in an actionable assault on a federal officer, which is a felony under Section 111 of the Federal Penal Code. Now, not just that, the agent's life was jeopardized because she might not have intended to run him over, but she wasn't trying to avoid running him over if that was necessary to escape, perhaps. The responsive use of force would be reasonable. The Fourth Amendment, the settled Fourth Amendment law, is that a police officer can use deadly force against a fleeing suspect if he has a good faith belief the suspect poses a significant threat of death or serious physical injury to that officer or other officers. So, McCarthy says he believes the driver was in the act of committing a dangerous assault when the agent opened fire in the first place. The driver's reckless operation of the vehicle, coupled with the fact that she was heedless of harming armed law enforcement agents as they were carrying out their official duties, underscores that it was reasonable to believe she posed a serious threat to that agent and others. Now, from a federal standpoint, a lot of this is not particularly relevant because, again, the Trump Justice Department is not going to prosecute this officer. President Trump put out a statement last night on Truth Social saying, quote, "I've just viewed the clip of the event, which took place in Minneapolis, Minnesota. It is a horrible thing to watch. The woman screaming was obviously a professional agitator, and the woman driving the car was very disorderly, obstructing and resisting, but then violently, willfully, and viciously ran over the ICE officer, who seems to have shot her in self-defense. Based on the attached clip, it is hard to believe he is alive, but is now recovering in the hospital." Now, again, because the president's statement, when it comes to it's hard to believe that he's alive, recovering in the hospital, and you can see on the tape that the officer who does the shooting walks away from the incident. So presumably he visited the hospital as a precautionary incident. But again, it's very hard to watch the tape and come away with the conclusion that it's hard to believe that the officer is alive. I mean, he's sort of clipped by the car as she drives. And again, that doesn't change the legal question as to whether the shooting is justifiable, but overstatement in any direction here tends to lead to an increase in sentiment, which is quite bad. So people who are claiming, for example, that this woman was just purely murdered, which we'll see is what the entire left is claiming. That this ICE officer, out of nowhere, pulled the gun, shot the lady for no reason. Right? That is going to lead to violence. It will lead to riots. It will lead to future attacks on ICE officers. On the other side, if you make the claim that this woman was directing the car, like trying to run the guy over pretty clearly from the tape, that is not super clear from the tape. An overstatement in that direction is going to lead to people saying, well, that's a lie, which means that the officer is lying, that the law enforcement is lying, that ICE is lying, and that it was a murder. So reactionary ping-ponging here is not helpful. Following the facts and looking at the tape is helpful. And you can make your own judgment. The tape is available for everyone. I've given you my judgment, which is that I can't judge her intent, whether she was attempting to clip the officer or harm the officer or run over the officer or move out of the way of the officer, but that's irrelevant. The only question is whether the officer reasonably perceived on an objective level that she was in the process of an imminent assault on him. And that seems fairly clear-cut on a legal level. Again, the legal level is not the same as sort of your gut level visceral reaction to the tape. There are some people who have the gut level visceral reaction. This is a crazy lady who is not just protesting ICE, she's obstructing ICE, and she was trying to kill the officer. There's some people who have that visceral reaction. There's some people who have the visceral reaction that she is attempting to avoid the officer, and the officer decided to use excessive force and shoot her. But as to the question of legal culpability and what officers have to do in the moment, you have a split second as an officer to determine whether she is trying to mow you down with the car or whether she's trying to, quote unquote, avoid you. Either way, she's engaged in an assault on a police officer using a motor vehicle which has the capacity for deadly force. And so if you're an officer, you can't risk that. As a general rule, you cannot risk that you're in front of the car, right? You're on the front left of the car, and the wheel is turned at you. And it's possible in the next millisecond that the wheel is going to turn away from you. What are you supposed to do? That's always the question for the officer. It's easy because we have the tape to look in retrospect and see that the wheel turns again, or it's easy to see that he gets nudged by the car. But again, I would urge everybody to use less charged language around the actual facts of the situation because, again, I think people can look at this and it's a Rorschach test. Anyway, the president says the situation is being studied in its entirety. The reason these incidents are happening is because the radical left is threatening, assaulting, and targeting our law enforcement officers and ICE agents on a daily basis. They're just trying to do the job of making America safe. We need to stand by and protect our law enforcement officers from this radical left movement of violence and hate. That last part is totally right. The environment that has been created by the left around ICE doing basic operations, like arresting people and deporting them for overstaying their visas and being in the country illegally. The language that's been used about ICE, that they are terrorists, that ICE is the Gestapo, this sort of language leads to a permission structure specifically designed to increase ire at ICE agents and to undermine their capacity to fulfill the law in non-dangerous environments. That is why people are out trying to physically obstruct ICE officers from doing their job. First, getting a wide variety of whole food ingredients into my diet, it's a priority for me this year, especially with all of the work at travel. Our sponsor, Balance of Nature's whole health system, makes it simple. Their convenient blend of fruits and veggies and easy-to-take capsules is kosher. It ensures I'm getting essential nutrients every single day without the hassle of prep work or meal planning. It's an effortless way to support my wellness goals while managing a busy, on-the-go lifestyle. Balance of Nature's whole health system supplements are incredibly versatile and easy to work into your daily routine. The fiber and spice supplement blends smoothly into your favorite drinks, adding a warm aromatic depth from its spice blend. And if you prefer, you can even open up the fruits and veggies capsules and mix the powder directly into a smoothie or sprinkle it over your meals. What makes these supplements special is that they're packed with 47 ingredients from 100% real whole fruits, vegetables, spices, fibers, everything from psyllium husk and flaxseed to cinnamon, turmeric, mango, pineapple, wild blueberries, shiitake mushroom, spinach, kale, cayenne pepper, and so much more. It's a simple way to give your body the nutrition it needs. I take Balance of Nature with me on the road. I'm constantly using it to keep myself healthy because, hey, can't miss a day. This New Year's, lock in 50% off for 1 year when you subscribe to the Whole Health System supplements as a preferred customer. Head on over to balanceofnature.com. That's balanceofnature.com. So when you look at the environment that has been created, thanks to the left, around ICE operations, it is honestly kind of shocking that you don't see assaults on ICE officers more often. And when you have more confrontations, this is just basic logic. When you have more confrontations between civilians and officers that are very fraught in nature. It is far more likely that something terrible like what happened in Minneapolis is going to happen. And you can see it in the immediate aftermath. Immediately after this, there is footage of a protester reaching for an ICE agent's gun. Here is some of that footage. You can see the protester reaching out to attempt to grab the gun from the ICE agent. This is immediately afterward, and gets hit in the face with a sort of gas canister there. Meanwhile, there's chaos on the street. Here's more footage from the street immediately afterward.
ICE is interacting with bystanders.
You can see again people getting very pushy with the ICE agents, physical confrontations with ICE agents. In this sort of environment, is it particularly shocking if, God forbid, somebody gets shot? And the more you have these sorts of situations, the more you have these confrontations that are spurred on by, again, political actors claiming basic law enforcement function is somehow an act of evil, you're going to end up with more contentious operations, more contentious confrontations. Minneapolis protesters were burning the American flag in the immediate aftermath of this event, of course.
Well, where you're at right now, and we're seeing the images on the screen, there's that flag you were talking about being burned here. What kind of things are they shouting, the crowd that's out there? I know they're obviously not happy ICE is there. They've been talking about that. What are they saying? You know, what's the energy like where you are right now?
So that's one reason why I'm not getting too close, so I can hear all of you, because it is loud out here. It's profanities, a lot of profanities against ICE.
Joining us on the line direct from Minneapolis is Brecca Stoll. She's a Daily Wire reporter. She's been on the ground. Brecca, thanks so much for taking the time. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Ben.
So what's your experience been like over there over the course of the last 24 hours or so?
Okay, so we landed yesterday night. We checked out the scene of the shooting. They had protesters there. That was about 1 a.m. They were still there. This morning, they were mobilizing at 7 a.m. That's where we are right now, outside of an ICE headquarter facility. We've seen 2 tear gases being sprayed so far. More looks like it's coming. I've seen an increase in intake of goggles. It is very hostile.
So when you're looking at the protesters behind you, what are the sorts of things they're chanting? What sorts of things are they saying?
They're saying insults. I've noticed older people are saying weaker insults. One guy said, did you spend this morning watching Saturday cartoons? Didn't make much sense. Younger people are saying more violent things like quit their job. They're using cursing language. I don't know what's going to happen. They seem to be egging on looks like border control, ICE people outside of the facility. And so we're just monitoring all of that.
Have you seen any physical confrontations between the people there and the ICE officers thus far, or is it mostly taunting?
I saw one confrontation. It was between a woman and looked like an ICE officer. She was interrogating him about why he would choose this job. She said that his line of work wasn't actually work. He said, I'm just doing my job. That was the only line of confrontation where I saw an ICE agent potentially engaging back. And so far, just mostly screaming, and definitely seeing a community organizers organizing these crowds. They want people visible at all points of entry to this. And so they're watching their numbers. I don't know if it's for visibility or what they're doing, but definitely people in the crowd mobilizing with a purpose.
How many people are out there, Brecca, in total? How many people have you seen kind of coming and going?
I'm seeing hundreds of people here. It looks like more are just coming in. Definitely would say hundreds. That demographic, I'm seeing older people. I'm seeing younger people. We know school's canceled, expecting to get more younger people out here as the day goes on. But yeah, I would say hundreds and definitely increasing.
Have you heard from any of the law enforcement on the ground over there about the possibility, the expectation that things may get violent later on in the day?
I haven't heard. Last night when we were walking by the scene of the shooting, I heard one woman talk about how Donald Trump wants to make an example out of Minneapolis, and it's important to keep this protest nonviolent. This seems like a different type of crowd today. I just think with the increase of goggles and just the uptick in language to the ICE officers, something could happen.
Well, that is our reporter on the ground, Brecca Stoll in Minneapolis. Keep safe out there. Really appreciate the time.
Thank you.
Meanwhile, protesters were gathering at the Minneapolis federal courthouse and chanting that ICE should leave. You can see them cracking the windows on the courthouse, attacking the courthouse. And this sort of activity has been a long time in coming. And of course, we have seen multiple assaults on ICE officers over the course of the last year, up to and including an attempted shooting at ICE facilities, people attempting to ram ICE officers with their cars. The Minnesota Police and Peace Officers Association put out a statement saying, quote, the Minnesota Police and Peace Officers Association stands firmly behind law enforcement officers, accountability under the law, and the safety of every Minnesota community. Irresponsible, reckless rhetoric from political leaders attacking law enforcement has real and dangerous consequences for officers on the street. When officers are vilified, demonized, or used as political props, it fuels hostility, emboldens bad actors, and puts lives directly at risk. MPPOA calls on leaders to stop the inflammatory language and respect the legal and investigative process. And again, that is just obviously true. When you over and over and over again suggest that ICE is the Gestapo, it is not a gigantic surprise when people go out there and start treating ICE like they are, in fact, the Gestapo. The Department of Homeland Security put out its own statement explaining the incident. It said, quote, today ICE officers in Minneapolis were conducting targeted operations when rioters began blocking ICE officers, and one of these violent rioters weaponized her vehicle attempting to run over our law enforcement officers in an attempt to kill them, an act of domestic terrorism. An ICE officer, fearing for his life, the lives of his fellow law enforcement, and the safety of the public, fired defensive shots. He used his training and saved his own life and that of his fellow officers. The alleged perpetrator was hit and is deceased. The ICE officers who were hurt are expected to make full recoveries. This is the direct consequence of constant attacks and demonization of our officers by sanctuary politicians who fuel and encourage rampant assaults on our law enforcement, who are facing a 1,300% increase in assaults against them and an 8,000% increase in death threats. This is an evolving situation. We'll give the public more information as soon as it becomes available. And again, I think that the last part of this statement about the ramping up of the rhetoric, that obviously has consequences. I've said before, you're only responsible for someone else's violence if you tell them to commit the violence. However, you are responsible for increasing the temperature beneath a boiling pot of water if you continue to turn up the flames. And that's something the left has been doing. As I said before about President Trump's statement, the description by DHS, if people find that to be at odds with the tape that they are looking at, quote, one of these violent rioters weaponized her vehicle attempting to run over our law enforcement officers in an attempt to kill them, an act of domestic terrorism. You know, if people see the tape and believe that's overstated, it doesn't help your case. Kristi Noem, who's the head of the Department of Homeland Security, said something similar yesterday.
It was an act of domestic terrorism. What happened was our ICE officers were out in an enforcement action. They got stuck in the snow because of the adverse weather that is in Minneapolis. They were attempting to push out their vehicle, and a woman attacked them and those surrounding them and attempted to run them over and ram them with her vehicle. An officer of ours acted quickly and defensively shot to protect himself and the people around him. And my understanding is that she was hit and is deceased. We're continuing to gather more information, but this goes to show the assaults that our ICE officers and our law enforcement are under every single day. These vehicle rammings are domestic acts of terrorism. We're working with the Department of Justice to prosecute them as such. We will continue to protect our ICE officers.
Okay, now, again, the attempt to label her a domestic terrorist as opposed to saying that what the officer did is justified under the law, which seems to be the case. Again, there are two separate questions that are now being conflated, and that lack of clarity is what's allowing for the argument to happen. So, what was her intent? Again, the woman who was shot, what was her intent in hitting the gas? Was it to run over the officer, or was it to escape the situation? I don't know her intent. I don't know what was in her head. All I can do is assess, based on the tape, what the officer's response could or should have been. And the question is, was it reasonable for him to assume that he was under an immediate threat of deadly assault? And the answer there is pretty clearly and obviously yes. Her intent is not the key question here. And so when you have the left jumping to her intent was to escape, and you have the right jumping to her intent was to kill the officer, and her intent is not the question, then what you end up with is an argument about the thing that doesn't matter when we should be talking about the thing that does matter. When you ramp up the rhetoric such that people want to impede ICE officers in doing their basic police function, and then when activity takes place that clearly is threatening enough on an objective level to justify a law enforcement officer discharging his weapon at the person, something has gone wrong, and that needs to stop. And arguing over her intent is utterly irrelevant when it comes to should, for example, the officer be prosecuted or did he do anything wrong on a legal level, which is the question. Tom Homan, by the way, I think got this right. The borders are. He said, listen, the investigation is going to play out.
It'd be unprofessional to comment on what I think happened in that situation. Let the investigation play out and hold people accountable based on the investigation.
I think many members of the public are calling for the same thing, and so they're confused. Maybe you can help me understand how the Department of Homeland Security could conclude so swiftly that this is a, quote, act of domestic terrorism, that this woman, quote, weaponized her vehicle. By the very same standard you describe, this investigation is just getting started.
That's the question for Homeland Security. I'm the border czar. Well, I can tell you what I've seen on my airplane ride here, looking at numerous videos, seeing numerous social media posts, statements from the Homeland Security, statements from Secretary Noem. I'll leave it at that.
But as a law enforcement officer,
what good is it to do right now, to me, prejudge the facts of what happened today without giving law enforcement professionals, whether it's the FBI or the local police there, give them time to look at all the videos, talk to all the witnesses, talk to the officers, and make an educated decision on what occurred today.
Okay, Tom Homan, that is the right take. And I wish that everybody would take that take, right? The take that we should let the process move forward because that's how the process works. And also just on a sort of dispositive level, it would be nearly impossible, and wrong, by the way, to prosecute an officer in a situation in which he pretty clearly objectively assessed that there was a reasonable risk to his life. Now, again, we've just talked about the Trump administration response. The left's response to this is unhinged, insane, nuts, totally nuts. So Mayor Jacob Frey, who was one of the people who led to the outburst of violence in 2020 over the death of George Floyd, put out a statement, quote, I'm aware of a shooting involving an ICE agent at 34th Street in Portland. The presence of federal immigration enforcement agents is causing chaos in our city. We're demanding ICE to leave the city immediately. We stand rock solid with our immigrant and refugee communities. Insane. Insane and ridiculous. Ridiculous. Federal law enforcement can't do its job because you have incentivized people to obstruct them, and your solution is the feds need to leave? ICE needs to leave? Obstructing federal law enforcement in the enforcement of law is a crime. It is a crime. Mayor Jacob Frey is a disaster area. He's been a disaster area for years. It got worse, by the way. He did a press conference and was telling ICE to get the F out of Minneapolis.
And I have a message for ICE. To ICE, get the f*** out of Minneapolis. We do not want you here. Your stated reason for being in this city is to create some kind of safety, and you are doing exactly the opposite. People are being hurt. Families are being ripped apart. Long-term Minneapolis residents that have contributed so greatly to our city, to our culture, to our economy are being terrorized, and now somebody is dead.
This is insane. This is insane. He's an insane person. What he is saying here is crazy. You guys keep saying over and over and over again that ICE agents are the bad guys. And then people attack ICE agents. We've had apparently over 100 ramming incidents over the course of the last year in which people have tried to run over ICE agents or hit them with their cars. And Jacob Frey is saying that the problem here is ICE doing its job. That is nuts. Again, stopping people, incenting people from allowing law enforcement to do its job, that is borderline criminal activity. I mean, Frey is, again, familiar with helping to initiate criminal activity, given his role in the 2020 riots. Here he was at that same press conference suggesting that ICE causes chaos and distress. Now, it seems to me that ICE's job is to enforce the law. Obstructing the law is what causes chaos and distress.
They are not here to cause safety in this city. What they are doing is not to provide safety in America. What they are doing is causing chaos and distrust. They're ripping families apart. They're sowing chaos on our streets. And in this case, quite literally killing people.
Okay, this is crazy. It's crazy. And it's going to get more ICE officers killed. And by the way, people who assault ICE officers and assault federal law enforcement. I mean, he is creating an incentive structure that justifies violence against law enforcement. That is what that is right there. And it's not just Jacob Frey. It's also the ridiculous, corrupt governor of Minnesota, Tim Walz, who came out in the aftermath of all of this and talked about the patriotic duty to protest, which is a wink, wink, nod, nod at people who have been getting up in the faces of ICE agents.
I want Minnesotans to hear this from me. The desire to get out and protest and to speak up to this administration of how wrong this is, that is a patriotic duty at this point in time.
It's a patriotic duty at this point in time. Not only that, he says that he is going to somehow activate the Minnesota National Guard to protect Minnesotans from ICE. Okay, well, that's not legal. Using state law enforcement to obstruct federal law enforcement is, in fact, kind of textbook definition of insurrection. I'm not sure what else to call that. Here is the guy who is almost vice president of the United States.
My primary responsibility as governor is the protection of the people of Minnesota. And you can be assured, whether it's the state patrol or whether it's the National Guard, their deployment is there to protect Minnesotans from whatever it is. If it's an act of nature, if it's a global pandemic, or in this case, if it is a rogue federal agent.
So I'm just wondering, how do you propose to use the National Guard to stop, quote unquote, rogue federal agents, especially when that federal agent appears to have acted within the boundaries of the law? Walz then suggested to Minnesotans that the move must be made to stop President Trump from invoking the Insurrection Act. So he's saying, don't riot, because if you do, then Trump's going to send in more force, which is true. But it's funny, he doesn't say don't riot because it's bad to riot. He says don't riot because it might lead President Trump to do the legal thing.
Minnesotans, don't take the bait. Do not take the bait. Do not allow them to deploy federal troops into here. Do not allow them to invoke the Insurrection Act. Do not allow them to declare martial law. Do not allow them to lie about the security and the decency of this state. And let's let this investigation play itself out.
Okay, well, again, let the investigation play itself out is a far cry from you need to go protest right now. Go protest. Go out there. It's a patriotic duty, according to Tim Walz. And not only that, he's calling for protests all around the country. They want to George Floyd this thing. Here is Tim Walz, who presided over the first George Floyd riots. And of course, his wife enjoyed, apparently. She sat outside and smelled the burning tires, she famously suggested.
To Americans who are watching this, if you're in Portland or you're in LA or you're in Chicago or you're wherever they're coming next, stand with us. Stand with us against this.
As always, the apotheosis of bad taste came in from left field in order to really encapsulate the radical left's take on this situation. I have to say, Jimmy Kimmel, man, dude never misses when it comes to missing. It is pretty astonishing. So last night, he decided to up the ante by suggesting, of course, that the president of the United States would like to murder you.
I know what they're doing. They're trying out a new slogan. Donald J. Trump is going to kill you. It's pretty good, right? This maniac, he isn't just killing people overseas. An ICE agent today shot and killed an unarmed 37-year-old woman during an ICE operation in Minneapolis. They're there under the guise of protecting us.
Again, this is insane. It's not just insane, it actually is dangerous. When you go around saying the president of the United States is legitimately trying to murder people, and then you link that to this ICE shooting, what you're doing is putting a target on the back of the people that you're talking about. That is what you're doing, rhetorically speaking. And, you know, this is going nowhere good. It's going nowhere good. Some of the congressional Democrats are out there making the most extraordinary claims. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, of course, can be counted on to make the most radical claim. She is back to her ICE must be dismantled take. And this has been a long time Democratic bugaboo. And it's fascinating to watch the left retreat back to its most extreme version, that ICE is some sort of terrorist organization, that ICE must be destroyed. Here is Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez going after Immigration and Customs Enforcement.
What we have now seen and what we are seeing is that ICE is not just becoming an anti-immigrant force in this country, it is becoming an anti-civilian paramilitary organization. People are getting taken off of the streets for exercising their free speech rights.
It's an anti-civilian paramilitary organization. But why are people attacking it then? Why are people attacking it? I mean, maybe it's because you keep saying that over and over. You're going to get people killed. What's sad about this is that Jacob Frey predicted this back in December, like just a few weeks ago. He suggested that someone was going to get seriously injured or killed. And he's right, but that's because you guys keep lying about what ICE does. You keep obstructing ICE operations. You keep telling people to do so. Here's Jacob Frey.
I am increasingly concerned because of the chaos that is being caused by these ICE agents that somebody is going to get seriously injured or killed. Somebody is going to get seriously injured or killed. And whether that is an ICE agent or a community member, we all know the tinderbox that could explode because of it.
And well, maybe you should stop creating more Tinder for the tinderbox. That would probably be one of the solutions you might want to think about. But again, this is what the left has created. They've created a climate in which you are supposed to go and stop ICE agents from doing their basic law enforcement function. And that leads exactly to these sorts of confusing, difficult, and deadly situations. That's what leads to all of this. The left bears absolute culpability for raising the ante over and over and over again by calling law enforcement officers the enemy. And I will say there is some irony to the fact, some dark irony to the fact that 2 days ago was January 6th, and all we heard about from members of Congress, Democrats, was that federal law enforcement are the best among us and must be protected, and January 6th is proof that you should never assault an officer. Obviously, I generally agree with that notion, but I agree with that consistently. You also shouldn't do it when it comes to assaulting ICE officers or hitting the gas when an ICE officer is in front of your car, for example. And now they've reverted right back to type. It turns out that federal law enforcement are the bad guys. Federal law enforcement are the people who have to be stopped at all costs. They're an anti-civilian paramilitary organization, according to Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez, possible presidential candidate for the Democrats in 2028. This is insane. People will get killed, and it will be ICE officers, and it will be people who attempt to impede ICE officers in their function of the law and try to hurt them. Stop ramping it up. Stop it. Stop it right now. Truly, it is bad stuff. It is a true act of malicious horror to do what the left has been doing with regard to impeding ICE operations or other law enforcement operations and suggesting that the men and women of ICE are the enemy. It's really, really bad, and it leads to precisely this sort of situation. Joining me online is Harmeet Dillon. She's Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights at the U.S. Department of Justice. Harmeet, thanks so much for taking the time.
Thanks for having me, Ben.
So I want to get to civil rights violations or possible civil rights violations in New York under Mayor Zohran Mamdani in just a second. First, I do need to get your general legal opinion on what's going down in Minneapolis. Obviously, this shooting that is under a lot of scrutiny by an ICE officer of a woman who appears to, at the very least, have attempted to assault an officer with a motor vehicle. What's your take legally on the situation?
Well, the Civil Rights Division is charged with investigating these types of incidents. And so given that it's under investigation right now, I can't really comment about it legally, but I think everyone can see with their own two eyes what has happened. And this Department of Justice has stopped the Civil Rights Division's weaponization unfairly of the government against law enforcement officials and assuming that they're in the wrong. So we'll objectively look at this and reach a conclusion as soon as all the evidence is in.
Well, on the other civil rights topic of the day, obviously, we're looking at what's going on in New York, where C. Weaver, a tenant advocate who's been named to a big profile position in Zohran Mamdani's administration, she has in the past made multiple comments about whites taking advantage of property law, about how whites don't deserve to own private property. What are you guys looking at to ensure that there is no violation of civil rights law in places like New York?
Well, this is one of many things I'm looking at in New York. Zohran Mamdani has rolled back some executive orders relating to anti-Semitism and other issues. What's alarming about this is that for years, this person has advocated the Marxist viewpoint that the redistribution of property is appropriate and is explicitly along racial lines, which is clearly illegal in the United States. And there are several federal statutes that I administer here, including the Fair Housing Act. There's an Equal Credit Act, and there's laws protecting the rights of veterans and our military in housing. and so forth. And so we will have a zero tolerance policy in this administration towards any kind of housing action that in any way discriminates against people on the basis of race or other protected characteristics. And race includes being a white person in the United States.
And so, Harmeet, what sort of legal standard has to be met in order for you guys to look into action taken by the New York government? Presumably, you would imagine that the Mamdani administration there will attempt to hide whatever anti-white agenda it has with regard to housing behind other sort of parchment barriers, an attempt to create so-called objective standards of law that only just happen to discriminate against white people. What's the actual standard that has to be met legally in order for you guys to look at it?
That's a great question because, now that we've eliminated our disparate impact framing of how we analyze the law, that actually directly implicates this. So if someone is super tricky and like they tried to do in San Francisco and say, oh, well, if you're a descendant of a slave, you get to have reparations. I mean, that's kind of more objective than if you're Black per se. So in this case, I think that these statements that have been made are very helpful. They're helpful evidence of intent. And the standards are similar in Title VII, employment discrimination, as well as discrimination in housing. In education. People are familiar with Students for Fair Admissions. Ultimately, we're going to look at whether race is an impermissible criterion or national origin. And you look at patterns and you look at how often decisions have been made that seem to be explicitly based on that. And you look at the outcomes. And so now that they've openly announced their preferences and their policies, we'll be looking very carefully for any changes that appear to be proxy attempts to racially gerrymander or racially benefit particular classes at the expenses of others. And I don't think it's going to be that hard to prove.
Well, that's Harmeet Dillon. She's Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights at the U.S. Department of Justice. Harmeet, really appreciate the time. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Well, meanwhile, Democrats across the country and in Congress are now talking about a government shutdown as a result of what just happened in Minneapolis. Senator Chris Murphy of Connecticut, who for some odd reason thinks he's going to run for president, put out a statement, quote, Democrats cannot vote for a Department of Homeland Security budget that doesn't restrain the growing lawlessness of this agency. Representative Pramila Jayapal of Washington, one of the most radical members of the Democratic coterie, said, quote, we can't just keep authorizing money for these illegal killers. That's what they are, this rogue force. Representative Delia Ramirez, another one of the radicals, said statements and letters are not enough. The appropriations process and CR expiring January 31st is our opportunity. Apparently, Representative Ro Khanna of California says we need to arrest that ICE agent for an excessive use of power. And we should be opposing the hundreds of billions of dollars going to a lawless agency. So Democrats are not going to cool this down. They're going to up the ante. Meanwhile, on a political level, I don't understand this, frankly. I don't. Regardless of whether you like the operations that President Trump has been having ICE carry out or not, the idea of defund ICE is basically defund the police for the border. It's not going to be popular. Just on a raw political level, it's unbelievably stupid. But Democrats seem to be repeatedly taking stupid political positions in pursuit of credibility with their radical base, I suppose. Roy Teixeira, who is not a Republican, he was a Democrat, and he has sort of turned to the moderate middle. He has a piece over at the New York Times talking about the dangers for Democrats in winking and nodding at the kind of fraud that was going on in Minnesota, some of which is what prompted a lot of the federal crackdown in terms of law enforcement and ICE's use in Minnesota. Teixeira says, before announcing that he would no longer seek re-election, Tim Walz admitted some fraud happened on his watch, but deflected, saying Republicans are appealing to racism and xenophobia. Mr. Walz's departure indicates this is no more effective than Democrats' response to welfare fraud accusations in the Reagan era. Americans detest people getting something for nothing, the very essence of fraud. As the party that typically wants more and more generous social programs, Democrats have a special responsibility to ensure that these programs are clean as a whistle and reward only those who work hard and play by the rules. The first response of Democrats to instances like Minnesota fraud findings should not be to criticize the other side for attacking them and wave the bloody shirt of racism against Trump, but rather to stress the seriousness of the problem and how it will not be tolerated. Failing that, Democrats are likely to find themselves once again in a Republican fraud trap. As more examples of fraud come to light, both in Minnesota and elsewhere, Democrats will find themselves continually back-footed by Republican accusations of negligence, if not outright complicity. And he's right about all of this. But again, it must be a play to, again, cater to the base. Meanwhile, Minneapolis gets more and more radical. According to Luke Rosiak reporting for the Daily Wire, progressives on Minneapolis' city council used the council's first meeting of the year to install members of the Democratic Socialists of America as both the majority and minority leader, seemingly installing a one-party state designed to ice out representation for the council's moderate minority. A woman named Aisha Chugtai will be the majority leader, saying her role would be to identify uncontroversial ideas the rest of the body largely agreed with. The minority leader would be tasked with convincing everybody else to accept those controversial ideas. So, one-party state over in Minneapolis, more and more radicalism. Insane. Speaking of the fraud, Caroline Leavitt over at the White House yesterday said all hands are on deck with regard to investigating and prosecuting fraud in Minnesota.
So, with all of that, rest assured, this is an all-hands-on-deck effort from the entire administration to get to the bottom of this and to ensure that the ripping off of taxpayers in the state of Minnesota, and it won't just be Minnesota, it'll be any state across this country where fraud has taken place, and we are protecting law-abiding, tax-paying American citizens.
Again, this is a winning issue for Republicans, and it's amazing the Democrats have decided that just because Trump is doing a thing, they must now do the opposite. Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison, who's up to his neck in a lot of this welfare fraud, he says, it's all politics. It's not serious.
One of the claims is that there has been hundreds of millions of dollars, but now there are some estimates that there could be $9 billion or more. And Noam was just suggesting they took hundreds of people off the street who were involved in fraud. Are you confident your office has done enough?
Of course, we've done enough, and we're doing more every single day. This is a political matter. This is not a serious thing.
Oh, really? It's not a serious thing? Pretty incredible. By the way, when we talk about how welfare fraud and immigration are linked, unfortunately, that is a reality. When you have a lot of people who come into the country and they are dirt poor and they do not have any intention of assimilating, they end up disproportionately on government programs, on the government dime. And if you have more people on the government dime, more of those people are likely to commit some form of fraud. This is just sort of basic logic here. Representative James Comer, he says 75% of the Somali population in the United States is on a form of welfare.
For 4 years under Joe Biden, they were trying to rush as many future Democrat voters into America as possible. And with this particular community, the Somali community, it appears over 75%, Maria, of the Somali population in America is on full welfare benefits. You know, the argument to letting people into the United States has always been we need workers, we need workers. For whatever reason, this particular community, which is a major flank in the Democrat Party, a major part of their Democrat base, they are milking the system.
Okay, so again, that is going to be tied into politics, no doubt. Meanwhile, Representative Brandon Gill of Texas questioned Minnesota officials in Congress yesterday, asking, why is it that so many Somali households are on welfare after 10 years of being in the country?
What percentage of Somali-headed households are on welfare in general?
I don't know.
It's 81%. What about, let me just ask you, after 10 years of being in the United States, what percentage of Somali immigrant households continue to be on welfare?
I don't know.
The number is 78%. So even after 10 years, 78% of Somali immigrant households continue to be on welfare.
Again, this is going to be, put aside the reality of the claim, which is true. This is going to be a lucrative political issue for Republicans, and Democrats taking the other side. That's total political insanity, true political insanity. And meanwhile, the Trump administration is trying to find some policy win with regard to affordability. According to Politico, the White House is now drafting an executive order broadly targeted at addressing Americans' frustration with the cost of living, including a push to allow people to dip into their retirement and college savings account to afford down payments on homes. The document, according to two people familiar with the drafting, is expected to include an action previewed by President Trump on Wednesday that would move toward banning large investors from acquiring single-family homes. Well, Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer said Senate Democrats tried to do this last year and Republicans blocked it. Well, I mean, that's true. It also happens not to be particularly good policy. Okay, the attempt to stop corporations, major corporations, from buying up single-family homes, it sounds fun and it sounds good, and it will have literally zero impact on the cost of housing. How do we know this? Well, because we actually have evidence as to how many single-family homes are owned by gigantic corporations. Some of it is rental stock, by the way. So When you're asking, a corporation buys a house and then flips it and then sells it again, that's a different question from a corporation buys a home and then rents it. If a corporation buys a home or creates a home and then rents it, that actually lowers the rents because it's increasing the supply of rental units. As far as corporations buying houses and then reselling those same houses, typically this is done in areas with low regulation. And it's typically done in areas where the price is already going up, and it actually lowers the price because they then build new inventory. So this is just bad policy. The reality is that large institutional investors own about 2% of all single-family rental stock. That's rental stock. And again, when a giant corporation buys up a block of houses and converts them to rents, that just opened up a bunch of rental units, which lowers the price because you increase the supply. Nearly all homes generally are owned by people who are not institutional investors. Most LLCs that buy homes are what you would call small businesses. So somebody buying a second home, or a guy on retirement who buys a second or third house to rent it out. The areas where mega investors, places that own over 100 single-family homes or 1,000 single-family homes, have ramped up purchases. Those generally include places like Atlanta, 11.4%, Memphis, 6.7%, Charlotte, 7%, Miami, 20%, Phoenix. Every single one of those markets has seen either a flatlining or cooling in prices since 2023, the opposite of places like California or New York. In fact, there is a paper that came out not all that long ago from a series of academics this is the AEI Housing Center, looking at the impact of barring corporations from buying homes. And what they conclude is the narrative that this is going to increase prices or create lack of inventory, this narrative is not supported by empirical evidence. The market share of institutional investors is less than 1% nationally, with 22 counties, 0.7% of counties, having a percentage as high as 5 to 10%. Further, their emergence was not a cause, but rather a reaction to government regulatory failures. Those failures include restrictions on home building that have resulted in a multi-million housing shortage, as well as the Federal Reserve's easy money and inflationary policies, particularly during the COVID-19 pandemic, that incentivized investors to ramp up home purchases. The solution isn't to ban institutional investors, but to allow more housing to be built. In fact, when you take a look again at the percentages, the vast, like nearly all people who own houses are families. Very, very few institutional investors who are buying up gigantic blocks of housing. As AEI says, it is true the nation faces a severe housing shortage, which we estimate to be around 6 million homes. But this deficit is the result of decades of underbuilding, driven by restrictive land use and zoning regulations, discretionary approvals, and high regulatory costs. For example, New York and particularly California have had home price to income ratios far above 3, the level generally considered affordable, for many decades. Housing has been unaffordable in these states long before institutional investors entered the business after the great financial crisis. Even if institutional investors were forced to sell all their holdings to the market, it would be a drop in the bucket given their small market share. So, again, this is not going to result in the kind of actual lowering of prices that seems to be what the Trump administration is going for. I understand that it's sort of a populist thing to do. It is also a violation of basic property rights. And meanwhile, the president of the United States has also apparently ordered a crackdown on defense industry stock buybacks. He put out a statement on Truth Social saying he would limit executive pay to $5 million. He said, quote, all U.S. defense contractors and the defense industry as a whole, beware. While we make the best military equipment in the world, no other country is even close, defense contractors are currently issuing massive dividends to their shareholders and massive stock buybacks at the expense and detriment of investing in plants and equipment. This situation will no longer be allowed or tolerated. Okay, let's just be clear. The reason that you do a stock buyback, typically speaking, is because you feel that your stock is undervalued on the open market. So you take your available cash, you buy your stock up because you believe you're going to be able to reissue that stock later at a higher price. That is why you do a stock buyback. The notion that you should instead take that money and invest in equipment, the whole point is the market is not appreciating what you're doing. And so when you do a stock buyback, you lower the amount of stock available. That drives up the price of the stock. You can then reissue the stock at a higher price and use that money to build the equipment, for example. President Trump says also executive pay packages in the defense industry are exorbitant and unjustifiable given how slowly these companies are delivering vital equipment to our military and our allies. Okay, again, this sort of populist nonsense in which we say that executive pay packages are the real reason why businesses aren't running better. I'd love to see one piece of empirical evidence for this. Tyler Cowen has done excellent work pointing out that there is no correlation whatsoever between high pay packages for CEOs and inefficiency of the companies for which they work. President Trump says defense companies are not producing our great military equipment rapidly enough, and once produced, not maintaining it properly or quickly. From this moment forward, these executives must build new and modern production plans, both for delivering and maintaining this important equipment and for building the latest models of future military equipment. Until they do so, no executive should be allowed to make in excess of $5 million, which is a mere fraction of what they are making now. Therefore, I will not permit dividends or stock buybacks for defense companies until such time as these problems are rectified. Again, I'm not sure. There's no connection here. There's no connection to stock buybacks, and we're not getting our military equipment fast enough. Do an open bidding process and allow other companies to bid. And no more of the sort of crony capitalism that happens in the defense industry. You want better defense contractors? Well, they're ready to go. I mean, there's a lot of money in that particular industry. So this sort of command and control economics is typically not productive. President Trump also put a statement out saying Raytheon has to step up. He said, I've been informed by the Department of War that defense contractor Raytheon has been the least responsive to the needs of the Department of War, the slowest in increasing volume, and the most aggressive spending on their shareholders rather than the needs and demands of the U.S. military. Well, I mean, if you have a contract with Raytheon and Raytheon breaks the contract, you should go over to Lockheed. Raytheon seems to think this is the Biden administration and this is business as usual. It's not. Either Raytheon steps up and starts investing in more upfront investments like plants or equipment, or they will no longer be doing business with the Department of War. Okay, that is the actual proper solution. Okay, like this idea that you're going to somehow be able to pressure them into building new factories by lowering CEO pay is silly. If Raytheon's doing a bad job, then you should shift the manufacturer over to other defense contractors. I mean, that is typically the way that this is done. On the other hand, on the good hand, President Trump says we do need to increase our military budget, which is true. We do need complete military superiority over all of our potential enemies. He says, after long and difficult negotiations with senators, congressmen, secretaries, and other political representatives, I've determined that for the good of our country, especially in these very troubled and dangerous times, our military budget for the year 2027 should not be $1 trillion, but rather $1.5 trillion. This will allow us to build the dream military we have long been entitled to, and more importantly, that will keep us safe and secure regardless of foe. And then he talks about how the tariffs are wonderful. That is irrelevant to the real question here, which is, should we be upgrading our military radically? And the answer is yes. Joe Biden did a terrible job of upgrading our military. Barack Obama did a far worse job even than Joe Biden of upgrading our military. We definitely need bigger stockpiles. We need a better production line. All of that is true. And so, yes, as a percentage of GDP, actually, the military spending of the United States has gone down over the course of the last decade or so. And President Trump is right about all of this. Well, joining me on the line is Mary Margaret Olohan, Daily Wire White House correspondent and the host of How to Take Out a Dictator in 88 Minutes, which is a journalism documentary that is now streaming at dailywire.com. It is the full-scale investigation into exactly how the operation to extradite Nicolas Maduro went down. Mary Margaret, thanks so much for taking the time. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Ben. Great to be here.
So it's a major project. How was this initiated in the first place?
So this was a video we wanted to do because we really wanted to take a closer look at how Trump's unprecedented raid in Venezuela went down. Obviously, this was a day when we all awoke. I awoke early in the morning and found that this had all already happened while we were sleeping. And so our Daily Wire team jumped on it. We were reporting all day long on this. But we wanted to take a closer look and show people really what happened. And so our Daily Wire graphics team did a phenomenal job showing people, giving them a close-up look of these images, these graphics, helping them understand how this went down, such as what was the president doing when this happened? Where was he? He was at Mar-a-Lago. They were watching it, as the president said, as if it were a movie. They were watching as our military took this action and as our Delta Force operatives literally blew through doors at Maduro's compound in Venezuela to capture the president of Venezuela and bring him and his wife back to the United States. So we used many different sources for this, spoke to U.S. officials, talked to all of our different sources here in Washington to understand the full picture of what happened in Venezuela that night, and to understand the true might of the United States military and the history that goes into our posturing when it comes to the Western Hemisphere. So this is a video I'm really excited about. I think that we're going to do many more videos like this, and we love showing our audience and the rest of the world exactly what's going on when it comes to the U.S. military and the might of the American public.
Now, Mary Margaret, how long was this operation in development? Because obviously this didn't materialize overnight.
So we purposely explained that in less than the time that it takes to watch The Lion King, this operation unfolded. There was about 88 minutes between the time that they arrived at Maduro's compound and the time that they had got him out over the ocean. So this is truly a historic operation. I believe it's the riskiest of its kind since we went and took out Osama bin Laden. These are major moves, and I believe they took place on the same day, the same anniversary, a very significant date. And so we wanted to show how many things happen in such a short period of time. That 88 minutes, I believe it's our own Michael Knowles who first pointed out that figure on social media, and it really exploded out there, helping people understand just all the different moving parts that go into such an operation. The Delta Force needing to know exactly where they were going, training in this compound in Kentucky, the very same style of compound that they went to and ultimately kidnapped or captured Maduro from at the end of the day. The training that the Night Stalkers went through, the operatives that carried Delta Force there and took them away, all these different moving parts. It was incredibly skilled mission, and the president says that no other country in the world could have carried it out in the way that we did.
That is certainly true. You can check out all the details on the operation in unprecedented fashion by watching How to Take Out a Dictator in 88 Minutes. It's now streaming at dailywire.com. Mary Margaret, thanks for your hard work on it and really appreciate the time.
Thank you so much, Ben.
Alrighty, folks, the show continues for our members right now. In a moment, we'll get to the latest in Venezuela. There's still a lot happening. Remember, in order to watch, you have to be a member. And if you're not a member, become a member. Use code Shapiro at checkout for 2 months free on all annual plans. Click that link in the description and join us.